In every corner of our planet, nature has been conducting experiments that defy explanation. Places where the impossible becomes reality, where the laws of physics seem suspended, and where landscapes exist that challenge everything we think we know about how the world should look. These aren't fantasy worlds or digital creations. They're real places you can visit today, if you know where to find them. From caves sealed for millions of years housing alien-like ecosystems, to lakes that burn with colours that shouldn't exist in nature, to stone forests that appear to float in midair. The places we'll explore today share something remarkable. They force us to question our basic understanding of what's possible on Earth. Scientists have studied them for decades, yet many still guard secrets we can't fully explain. Some were formed by processes so rare they might never happen again. Others continue changing before our eyes in ways that baffle researchers. Sondong Cave, Vietnam. Deep beneath the jungles of Vietnam lies something that challenges everything we thought we knew about the underground world. A place so vast that weather systems form inside it, so immense that entire city blocks could fit within its chambers, so mysterious that after decades of exploration, we've barely scratched the surface of its secrets. This is Sondong Cave, and its story begins with the sound of wind rushing through stone. In 1991, a local jungle man named Ho Khan was seeking shelter during a storm in the dense forests of Phong Nha, Ke Bang National Park. As rain poured down around him, he heard something unusual, a deep hollow roar coming from beneath his feet. Following the sound, he discovered a narrow opening in the limestone, with air rushing out so forcefully it felt like the mountain was breathing. But the entrance dropped into absolute darkness, and without proper equipment, Ho Khan could only mark the location in his memory and continue on his way. For 18 years that memory haunted him. The sound of that underground wind, the feeling that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. He would return to search for the entrance again and again, but the jungle had already begun to reclaim it. Vines grew over the opening, and the landscape shifted with each monsoon season. The cave entrance seemed to vanish as if it had never existed at all. Meanwhile, half a world away, British caver Howard Limbert was making a different kind of discovery. Since the early 1990s, Limbert and his team from the British Cave Research Foundation had been mapping the extensive cave systems of central Vietnam. They had already found some remarkable underground passages, but local stories kept mentioning something larger, something that the jungle people called the Cave of the Mountain behind Dung village. In 2008, Ho Khan encountered Limbert's expedition team. After years of searching, he had finally relocated his mysterious cave entrance. But when he offered to guide the British cavers to the site, they were initially skeptical. Local stories about large caves were common, and many led to disappointment. However, something about Ho Khan's description of the wind and the roaring sound intrigued them enough to follow him into the jungle. What they found defied comprehension. The entrance that Ho Khan led them to opened into a passage so large that their most powerful lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. As they descended deeper, the scale became almost impossible to process. They were walking through chambers that could hold entire city buildings. Underground rivers flowed past them in the darkness, creating the roaring sound that had first attracted Ho Khan's attention decades earlier. But the real surprise came when they looked up and saw patches of green overhead. Sunlight was filtering down from above, illuminating what appeared to be trees growing inside the cave. Massive dolens, sinkholes that had opened up in the cave ceiling over millions of years, had created skylights that allowed entire underground jungles to flourish in chambers larger than most cathedrals. As Limbert's team began their preliminary survey in 2009, the measurements they recorded seemed almost impossible to believe. The main passage stretched over 5 kilometers long, with sections reaching heights of 200 meters and widths of 150 meters. To put this in perspective, these chambers were so large that a Boeing 747 could fly through them without touching the walls or ceiling. Some sections contained enough space to fit a 40-story skyscraper. The volume calculations were even more staggering. Sondong contained an estimated 38.5 million cubic meters of space, making it by far the largest cave passage in the world by volume. It wasn't just a cave, it was an underground world with its own weather systems, ecosystems, and geological wonders. But how does something this massive form beneath the earth without anyone knowing about it? The answer lies in the unique geological history of this region. Sondong sits within the Phong Nha, Kaibang limestone massif, an area where ancient seafloors were lifted and compressed over millions of years. The limestone here is particularly pure and thick, creating ideal conditions for large-scale cave development. The cave began forming approximately 2 to 5 million years ago when underground rivers, the Rauthuong and Kei Ri, began flowing through natural joints and fractures in the limestone. Unlike typical cave formation where acidic water slowly dissolves rock over time, Sondong was carved by the sheer mechanical force of massive underground rivers that cut through the limestone like ancient subterranean highways. The process accelerated when the rivers encountered layers of harder rock that acted as natural dams. Water backed up behind these barriers for thousands of years before finally breaking through, creating the enormous chambers we see today. When water levels dropped during different geological periods, the cave was left as a hollow void beneath the jungle floor. What makes Sondong even more remarkable is its active ecosystem. The dolins that puncture the cave ceiling have created isolated pockets of life that have evolved in near total isolation. These underground jungles contain species that may be unique to the cave environment. Scientists have identified over 2,500 different species living within the cave system, including many that have never been catalogued anywhere else on Earth. The cave creates its own weather patterns. Temperature differences between the various chambers cause air currents that can reach significant speeds. Humidity levels vary dramatically depending on proximity to underground rivers and the massive jade-coloured pools that form in certain chambers. Clouds actually form inside the cave when warm, moist air from the underground rivers meets cooler air in the larger chambers. These internal weather systems have created some of the most spectacular formations found anywhere underground. Stalagmites reach heights of 80 metres, taller than many city buildings. Flowstone cascades create limestone waterfalls that dwarf anything found in typical caves. Some formations are so large and intricate that they've been given names like Hand of Dog and Great Wall of Vietnam. Yet for all we've learned about Sondong since its official discovery, enormous mysteries remain. Recent surveys have revealed that the cave system extends far beyond what was initially mapped. New passages are discovered with each expedition, suggesting that Sondong may be connected to other cave systems in ways we don't yet understand. Scientists still don't fully comprehend the cave's unique ecosystem. How do plants and animals survive in chambers that receive only filtered sunlight? What evolutionary pressures have shaped the species found nowhere else on Earth? Some sections of the cave remain completely unexplored due to underground rivers that are too dangerous to navigate, or passages that require technical climbing skills beyond what current expeditions can safely attempt. Perhaps most intriguingly, geological surveys suggest that Sondong is still growing. The underground rivers that carved it continue to flow, slowly expanding certain passages while simultaneously depositing minerals that could eventually seal others. The cave exists in a constant state of geological evolution, with new chambers potentially forming even as others are changing shape. The sound that first attracted Hokan's attention in 1991 continues to echo through these vast chambers. It's the sound of air moving through spaces so large that they create their own atmospheric pressure systems. Movile Cave, Romania. There are places on Earth that shouldn't exist, places where the very air would kill you in minutes, where darkness has reigned for millions of years, and where life has found a way to thrive in conditions so hostile they mirror what we might expect to find on alien worlds. In southeastern Romania, 20 metres beneath a construction site, lies one such impossible place. A sealed world that has been cut off from the surface for longer than humans have existed. In 1986, Romanian workers were digging foundations near the town of Mangalia when their excavation equipment broke through into empty space below. What they had stumbled upon would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about life on Earth. The hole they had accidentally created led to a cave system that had been completely sealed from the outside world for 5.5 million years. Longer than our species has walked the planet, longer than the last ice age, longer than the formation of the Mediterranean Sea. The man who first entered this sealed world was Cristian Lascu, a Romanian speleologist working with the team. What he found when he descended into the cavity defied all expectations. The air itself was toxic, thick with hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide, with oxygen levels so low that a human could barely survive for more than a few minutes without breathing equipment. The atmosphere was warm and humid, filled with gases that would be lethal to most surface life. Yet somehow, impossibly, this poisonous environment was teeming with creatures. In the beam of Lascaux's headlamp, pale ghostly forms moved through the darkness. Spiders with legs spanning several inches scuttled across limestone formations. Centipedes, albino and eyeless, hunted through pools of water that should have been lifeless. Strange worms writhed in the toxic atmosphere, and creatures that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen moved through this underground hell, as if it were paradise. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Here was an ecosystem that had been completely isolated from the surface world since before the dawn of human civilization. Every creature Lascaux encountered was unknown to science. They had evolved in total isolation, developing in ways that seemed to defy the basic rules of biology. Most remarkably, they were thriving in an environment that would kill surface animals within minutes. When teams of biologists finally made their way into Movile Cave in the following months, they found themselves face to face with evolution's most extreme experiment. The cave system was small, only about 240 meters long, but it contained biological treasures beyond imagination. In pools of mineral-rich water heated by geothermal activity, they discovered an entire food web based on principles completely different from anything found on the surface. At the foundation of this alien ecosystem were bacteria unlike any seen before. Instead of using sunlight for energy like plants do through photosynthesis, these microorganisms were performing chemosynthesis, feeding directly on the toxic chemicals in the water. They were converting hydrogen sulfide, methane, and carbon dioxide into organic compounds, creating the base of a food chain that had never seen a single ray of sunlight. The bacteria formed thick, slimy mats called biofilms on the cave walls and in the water. These living carpets served as food for a hierarchy of creatures that had evolved specifically to exploit this chemical energy source. Small invertebrates grazed on the bacterial mats, which were in turn hunted by larger predators. It was an ecosystem running entirely on poison, sustained by processes that most surface life would find deadly. The creatures themselves were marvels of evolutionary adaptation. Of the 48 species discovered in Movile Cave, 33 were completely new to science and found nowhere else on Earth. They had developed the classic features of cave-adapted animals: loss of pigmentation, reduced or absent eyes, enhanced sensory organs, and elongated appendages for navigating in complete darkness. But these adaptations had been taken to extremes rarely seen elsewhere. The cave spiders were particularly remarkable. Completely blind and ghostly white, they had developed hunting strategies perfectly suited to their toxic environment. Their legs had grown disproportionately long, giving them an almost alien appearance as they moved through the darkness feeling for prey. Some species had developed the ability to detect the slightest vibrations in the water, allowing them to hunt in pools where their prey moved almost invisibly through the bacterial mats. The centipedes were equally extraordinary. Some species had grown to impressive sizes, becoming the apex predators of this underground world. They moved through the cave with a fluid grace, their pale bodies undulating as they hunted smaller creatures. Their sensory systems had become so refined that they could detect chemical gradients in the toxic atmosphere, following scent trails that would be undetectable to surface animals. Perhaps most intriguing were the aquatic species, worms, leeches, and small crustaceans that had adapted to life in the mineral-rich pools. These creatures lived their entire lives in water so loaded with toxic chemicals that it would burn the skin of surface animals. Yet they had not merely survived in this environment, they had flourished, developing specialized physiologies that allowed them to extract nutrients from the chemical soup around them. As scientists began to study the cave ecosystem more intensively, they realized they were looking at a window into Earth's ancient past. This type of chemosynthesis-based ecosystem might have been common on early Earth before photosynthesis evolved and changed the planet's atmosphere. Movile Cave was like finding a living fossil of an entire biological process, a preserved example of how life might have functioned billions of years ago. The implications extended far beyond Earth's history. If life could thrive in such extreme conditions here, what might this mean for the possibility of life on other planets? The conditions in Movile Cave, toxic atmosphere, no sunlight, extreme chemical environments, were similar to what scientists expected to find on Mars, Europa, or other worlds in our solar system. The cave had become a natural laboratory for studying extremophile organisms and the limits of life itself. Yet even as research continued, new mysteries emerged with each expedition. Scientists discovered that the cave's ecosystem was far more complex than initially believed. The relationships between different species revealed intricate webs of dependency that had evolved over millions of years. Some creatures appeared to have multiple feeding strategies, switching between different food sources depending on conditions in various parts of the cave. The thermal environment of the cave also proved more complex than expected. Different chambers maintained different temperatures, and the flow of geothermal water created microclimates that supported different communities of organisms. Some areas were dominated by thick bacterial mats, while others supported different types of chemosynthetic communities based on varying chemical compositions. One of the most puzzling discoveries was the presence of organic compounds that seemed to have no clear source. Scientists found complex molecules in the cave water that suggested biological processes they didn't fully understand were taking place. The bacterial communities were producing compounds that traditional biology couldn't easily explain, hinting at metabolic pathways that might represent entirely new forms of biochemistry. Recent genetic studies have revealed that some of the cave species have been isolated for even longer than the cave's 5.5 million year seal would suggest. Certain organisms showed genetic divergence patterns indicating they had already been separated from surface relatives for much longer periods, possibly dating back tens of millions of years. This suggests that the cave system might have been periodically sealed and reopened throughout geological time, creating pulses of isolation that drove rapid evolutionary change. The cave continues to yield new species with each careful expedition. Access is strictly limited to protect the delicate ecosystem, and scientists estimate that many parts of the cave system remain unexplored. Recent sonar mapping has revealed additional chambers that may contain entirely different communities of organisms. The cave's total biodiversity might be significantly higher than current counts suggest. The toxic atmosphere itself remains incompletely understood. While scientists know that the hydrogen sulfide comes from deep geological sources, the exact mechanisms that maintain the cave's precise chemical balance are still being studied. The cave represents a complex chemical system where biological and geological processes interact in ways that create a stable but deadly environment perfectly suited to its remarkable inhabitants. Fingal's Cave, Scotland. Music lives in the strangest places. Sometimes it emerges from the hands of a composer, sometimes from the strings of an instrument. But on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, music rises from the earth itself, from walls of ancient stone that have been singing the same haunting melody for thousands of years. The locals call it an Uam Bin, the Cave of Melody, but the world knows it as Fingal's Cave, named for a legendary Irish giant whose story is woven so deeply into the fabric of Celtic culture that reality and myth have become impossible to separate. The legend begins with Fionn mac Cumhail, known to the Scots as Fingal, a warrior giant of immense strength and wisdom who commanded the Fianna, an elite band of Irish warriors. According to the ancient tales passed down through generations of Celtic storytellers, Fingal was challenged by Benandonna, a fearsome Scottish giant who lived across the sea. The two giants hurled insults across the water between Ireland and Scotland, each daring the other to come and fight. Fingal, never one to back down from a challenge, began hurling massive stones into the sea, creating a bridge of hexagonal columns that stretched from the Irish coast all the way to the Scottish Islands. This causeway would allow him to march across and face his enemy. But when Fingal finally crossed to Scotland and saw the enormous size of Benandonna, he realised he had met his match. Using his cunning instead of his strength, he disguised himself as a baby and had his wife present him to the Scottish giant as their infant son. When Benandonna saw the size of Fingal's baby, he imagined how large the father must be and fled back to Scotland, destroying the causeway behind him to prevent pursuit. All that remained of Fingal's great bridge were the hexagonal columns we now see at the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland and the matching formations at Fingal's Cave in Scotland, two ends of an ancient stone bridge built by giants. But in the Scottish version of the legend, the cave on the island of Staffa became more than just a remnant of this mythical construction. It became Fingal's Hall, a place where the great warrior would retreat to contemplate and where his spirit would forever dwell, playing music on the stone columns that form the walls of his supernatural palace. For centuries, the Gaelic-speaking communities of the Scottish Highlands and Islands held this cave sacred. They spoke of it in hushed tones, describing how the sea would enter the cavern and create sounds so beautiful and otherworldly that they could only be the music of the spirits. Fishermen passing the island would cross themselves and offer prayers, believing they were sailing past the dwelling place of one of their greatest legendary heroes. The cave was a pilgrimage site for Celtic bards and storytellers, who would brave the dangerous seas to sit within its walls and listen to what they believed was the voice of Fingal himself, still singing his ancient songs. The transformation of this sacred Celtic site into a wonder of the modern world began in 1772 with the arrival of Sir Joseph Banks, the renowned naturalist who had sailed with Captain Cook. Banks was exploring the Inner Hebrides as part of his scientific investigations, when local guides, despite their superstitions, agreed to take him to the legendary cave. When Banks stepped into the cavern, he found himself face to face with one of nature's most spectacular architectural achievements, towering hexagonal columns of basalt that rose like the pipes of a massive organ, creating a natural cathedral that resonated with the sounds of the sea. Banks was immediately struck by the cave's acoustic properties. The regular geometry of the basalt columns, each formed by the cooling and contraction of ancient lava flows, created a natural resonance chamber unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The sound of waves entering the cave was amplified and transformed, creating deep, haunting tones that seemed to come from the stone itself. He wrote in his journal that the cave produced the most perfect natural echo he had ever heard, with sounds lingering and building upon themselves in complex harmonies. It was Banks who gave the cave its English name, drawing upon James Macpherson's recently published Ossian poems, which had introduced Fingal to English-speaking audiences as a romantic hero of ancient Celtic literature. By naming it Fingal's Cave, Banks created a bridge between the ancient Gaelic traditions and the emerging romantic movement that was beginning to sweep through European culture. Word of the cave's existence spread rapidly through intellectual circles. In 1773, just 1 year after Banks's visit, the famous literary duo of Samuel Johnson and James Boswell made their own pilgrimage to Staffa. Johnson, initially sceptical of the cave's reputation, found himself deeply moved by the experience. He wrote that the cave presented such columns as might support the roof of a temple of gods, and described how the sound of the sea within the cavern created an atmosphere of profound reverence and wonder. These early visitors sparked a wave of pilgrimages that would continue throughout the 19th century. The cave became a required stop for anyone seeking to understand the sublime power of nature. Artists, writers, composers and scientists all made the difficult journey to this remote island, drawn by reports of a place where geology and music merged into something approaching the divine. The most famous of these pilgrimages occurred in 1829 when a young Felix Mendelssohn arrived at Fingal's Cave during a tour of Scotland. The 20-year-old composer was immediately overwhelmed by the cave's acoustics. Standing within the basalt cathedral, listening to the complex interplay of wave sounds and stone echoes, he experienced what he later described as a moment of perfect musical inspiration. He wrote to his sister that evening, including in his letter the opening measures of what would become his Hebrides Overture, also known as Fingal's Cave. Mendelssohn's composition captured something essential about the cave's acoustic character. The music mirrors the rising and falling of waves, the complex resonances created by the basalt columns, and the sense of ancient mystery that pervades the space. When the overture premiered in London in 1832, it introduced thousands of people to the sonic landscape of Fingal's Cave, creating a musical monument to the site that continues to be performed worldwide. But Mendelssohn was not the only artist transformed by the cave's power. The painter J.M.W. Turner visited multiple times, creating a series of dramatic watercolours that attempted to capture both the visual spectacle of the basalt columns and the mysterious play of light and sound within the cavern. His paintings show how the cave affects human perception, with figures dwarfed by the geometric precision of the stone walls and overwhelmed by the sensory intensity of the experience. As scientific understanding advanced, researchers began to investigate exactly why Fingal's Cave produces such extraordinary acoustic effects. they discovered that the cave's geometry creates what acousticians call a natural reverberation chamber. The hexagonal basalt columns, each precisely formed by cooling lava, act like the pipes of a massive organ. When waves enter the cave, they create pressure changes that cause the entire structure to resonate at specific frequencies. Studies have shown that the cave amplifies sounds in the frequency range most pleasing to human ears, roughly the same range as the human voice and most musical instruments. This means that any sound made within the cave, whether the crash of waves or human speech, is naturally enhanced and made more musical. The reverberation time, how long sounds continue to echo, varies depending on wave conditions, creating an ever-changing acoustic environment that never sounds exactly the same twice. Modern acoustic analysis has revealed layers of complexity in the cave's sound production that early visitors could only sense intuitively. The interaction between incoming waves, the resonance of the basalt columns, and the cave's specific dimensions creates what scientists describe as a complex harmonic system. Different areas within the cave emphasize different frequency ranges, creating natural acoustic zones that would allow multiple musicians to perform together with perfect natural balance. Recent archaeological investigations have added new dimensions to our understanding of the cave's cultural significance. Evidence suggests that the site may have been visited by humans for thousands of years, long before the historical period when Celtic legends first mentioned it. Stone tools and other artifacts found on Staffa indicate that ancient peoples may have specifically sought out the cave for its acoustic properties, possibly using it for ritual purposes or as a natural amplification system for ceremonies and storytelling. The ongoing scientific study of Fingal's cave continues to reveal new aspects of its remarkable properties. Researchers are now investigating how the cave's acoustics may have influenced the development of Celtic music and poetry. They theorize that the specific resonant frequencies of the cave may have shaped the tonal characteristics of traditional Gaelic songs, creating a feedback loop between natural acoustics and human musical expression that lasted for centuries. Current research also explores how the cave's sound changes with tidal conditions, weather patterns, and seasonal variations. Scientists have discovered that the cave essentially acts as a massive musical instrument played by the forces of nature, with the sea as the performer and the basalt columns as the strings. The complexity of this natural music continues to inspire both scientific investigation and artistic interpretation, ensuring that Fingal's cave remains as mysterious and compelling today as it was to those first Celtic storytellers who heard the voice of their legendary hero singing in the stones. Marble caves, Chile. Some places on Earth feel like they exist in a different dimension entirely, where solid rock transforms into liquid poetry, where water becomes light, and where the boundary between dream and reality dissolves completely. Hidden in the remote wilderness of Chilean Patagonia, accessible only by kayak or small boat across the frigid waters of General Carrera Lake, lies a series of caves that challenge not just what you expect to see, but how your brain processes what it means to see at all. The first sensation hits you before you even enter the caves. It's the cold. The Patagonian wind cuts across General Carrera Lake with a sharpness that penetrates every layer of clothing, carrying with it the ancient breath of glaciers that have been exhaling ice into this water for thousands of years. Your hands ache as you grip the paddle of your kayak, and each stroke through the lake sends spray that stings like tiny needles against your face. But as you approach the Marble Peninsula, something extraordinary begins to happen to the world around you. The water beneath your kayak starts to glow, not with any artificial light, but with an impossible turquoise luminescence that seems to emanate from the lake itself. This is glacial water, loaded with rock flour so fine that it transforms ordinary sunlight into something that belongs in a fairy tale. The particles suspended in the water scatter light in wavelengths that human eyes perceive as the most vivid blue-green imaginable. A colour so saturated it almost hurts to look at directly. As your kayak approaches the first cave entrance, the sound of the world begins to change. The sharp whistle of Patagonian wind gives way to something softer, more musical. Water laps against marble walls with a gentle percussion that echoes and builds upon itself. Each drop creates ripples that catch and fracture the blue light, sending patterns of illumination dancing across the cave ceiling like living stained glass. Then you enter the marble cathedral itself, and reality as you understand it ceases to exist. The walls around you pulse with colour. What should be white marble has been transformed into a living canvas of blues, greens, and turquoise that shift and flow like liquid silk. These are not painted walls. They are solid stone reflecting the light from the water below, but the effect is so surreal that your brain struggles to process what it's seeing. The marble appears to breathe, to move, to dance with patterns that change with every slight movement of water beneath your kayak. The caves amplify every sound into something approaching music. Your paddle cutting through water becomes a soft chord. Your breathing echoes back as a whispered melody. When you speak, your voice returns to you transformed, layered with harmonies created by the precise acoustics of the marble chambers. The caves have turned into resonance chambers, each one tuned by 6,000 years of wave action to create perfect natural reverb. Above you, the ceiling swirls with patterns that seem impossible in solid rock. Mineral veins flow like frozen rivers, white calcium carbonate threading through the marble in designs too perfect to be accidental, too organic to be planned. Your eyes follow these patterns until they disappear into shadows that the reflected light cannot reach, creating the sense that you're floating through infinite space rather than paddling through a cave. The temperature inside the caves is different from the lake outside. Warmer, more humid, filled with the breath of stone that has been absorbing and releasing heat for millennia. You can feel the warmth radiating from the marble walls, a gentle thermal embrace that contrasts sharply with the brutal cold of the Patagonian air. The humidity carries with it a mineral scent, clean, ancient like the smell of rain on hot stone. But it's the light that truly overwhelms every sense. The turquoise water below doesn't just reflect light upward, it transforms it, bends it, plays with it in ways that create optical effects found nowhere else on Earth. The light becomes liquid, flowing across the marble surfaces in waves that mirror the movement of water beneath your kayak. When wind creates ripples on the lake surface, the entire cave interior comes alive with moving patterns of blue and white light that dance across every surface. Your sense of scale becomes completely distorted. The caves feel simultaneously intimate and vast, like floating inside a gemstone or drifting through the interior of a glacier. The marble walls curve around you in organic shapes that seem to embrace your kayak, while extending upward into chambers that your eyes cannot fully comprehend. Some passages narrow to barely allow your kayak through, while others open into cathedrals large enough to hold orchestras. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Visitors consistently report feeling as though they have entered a sacred space, a natural temple where the ordinary laws of physics seem suspended. The combination of the impossible colours, the musical acoustics, and the otherworldly light creates a sensory experience that the human brain struggles to categorise. Many people find themselves whispering without realising it, as if speaking too loudly would somehow break the spell that makes this place possible. The caves affect your sense of time as well. Minutes feel like hours as you float through chambers where every surface tells a story written in stone over 6 millennia. Hours feel like minutes as you become lost in the hypnotic play of light and water. The outside world, with its harsh winds and demanding realities, feels impossibly distant, as if it exists in another universe entirely. The science behind these overwhelming sensory effects lies in a perfect convergence of geological, optical, and acoustic phenomena that would be virtually impossible to replicate artificially. The marble itself was formed over 300 million years ago from limestone deposits compressed deep beneath ancient seas. When tectonic forces lifted these formations, they created a peninsula of nearly pure calcium carbonate marble extending into what would eventually become General Carrera Lake. Over the past 6,000 years, wave action from the lake has carved these caves through a process of gradual erosion. But unlike typical cave formation that creates rough, irregular surfaces, the marble has been polished smooth by constant water movement, creating surfaces that reflect light with mirror-like precision. The mineral composition of the marble, nearly 95% calcium carbonate, gives it optical properties that enhance the reflection and refraction of light in very specific ways. The turquoise colour of the water results from an extraordinary combination of factors. Glacial meltwater from nearby glaciers carries rock flour, particles of stone ground so fine by glacial movement that they remain suspended in the water indefinitely. These particles scatter light according to Rayleigh's scattering principles, preferentially reflecting blue and green wavelengths while absorbing other colours. The result is water that acts like a natural filter, creating the most vivid blue-green colour found in any natural body of water on Earth. The acoustic properties of the caves result from their specific geometry and the reflective qualities of polished marble. Sound waves bounce between the smooth surfaces in patterns that create natural reverberation chambers with reverberation times of up to 4 seconds. This means that every sound, from water movement to human voices, is naturally enhanced and sustained, creating an environment where even the slightest noise becomes musical. The temperature differential between the caves and the outside air creates convection currents that contribute to the unique atmospheric conditions inside. Warm air rising from the marble surfaces meets cool air entering from the lake, creating gentle air movements that affect how sound travels and how humidity distributes throughout the cave system. This creates microclimates within individual caves that can vary significantly in temperature, humidity, and acoustic properties. Humans are drawn to places like the marble caves because they trigger deep neurological and psychological responses that have been shaped by millions of years of evolution. The combination of water, light, and enclosed spaces activates what environmental psychologists call the fascination response, a state of effortless attention that occurs when our sensory systems encounter environments that are both beautiful and slightly threatening. The caves provide safety and shelter, while simultaneously overwhelming us with sensory information, creating a psychological state similar to what our ancestors might have experienced in the most magnificent natural shelters. The specific colours found in the caves, the blues and turquoises of the light and water, trigger neurological responses associated with calm and tranquility. Research in colour psychology has shown that these wavelengths of light have measurable effects on heart rate, breathing, and stress hormone production. Spending time in environments dominated by these colours naturally induces states of relaxation and wonder that many visitors describe as almost meditative. The acoustic environment of the caves also plays a crucial role in their psychological impact. The natural reverberation creates what acoustic researchers call an enveloping sound field that gives listeners the sensation of being wrapped in sound. This triggers the same neurological responses associated with being in large natural spaces like forests or canyons, environments where early humans would have felt both awe and a sense of protection. Current research into the caves continues to reveal new aspects of their remarkable sensory properties. Scientists studying the optical effects have discovered that the interaction between the marble surfaces and the glacial water creates wavelength combinations that are rare in nature. The caves essentially function as natural optical instruments, concentrating and transforming light in ways that would require sophisticated equipment to replicate in laboratory settings. Acoustic researchers have found that different chambers within the cave system have distinctly different sonic characteristics, creating what amounts to a natural sound laboratory where various acoustic phenomena can be studied. Some chambers emphasize low frequencies, creating deep resonant tones, while others enhance higher frequencies, producing crystalline bell-like sounds. The caves have become valuable research sites for understanding how natural acoustics can inspire architectural and musical design. The ongoing formation process means that the caves continue to evolve, with new chambers being carved and existing ones changing shape as wave patterns shift with seasonal water level variations. This constant, subtle transformation ensures that no two visits to the caves are identical. The play of light and sound changes not just with weather and time of day, but with the gradual, eternal process of water sculpting stone into ever-new forms of beauty. Cave of the Apocalypse, Patmos, Greece. In a time when the line between what we can touch and what we can only imagine seems increasingly blurred, there exists a cave on a small Greek island where the most profound visions in human history were born. Today, pilgrims from around the world descend stone steps worn smooth by 2,000 years of footsteps, entering a humble grotto where the boundary between heaven and earth dissolved completely for one man whose visions would shape the faith of billions. This is the Cave of the Apocalypse on the island of Patmos, where the last book of the Christian Bible emerged from darkness into eternal light. Modern visitors to the cave first encounter its profound stillness. The constant Aegean winds that buffet the island above fade to whispers as you descend toward the cave entrance. The temperature drops noticeably as you move from the bright Mediterranean sunlight into the cool shadows of the rock. Inside the cave itself, the air carries the scent of centuries, old stone, ancient wood from icon stands, and the lingering traces of incense burned by countless pilgrims who have sought connection to the divine in this sacred space. The cave is surprisingly small and intimate. Unlike the vast underground cathedrals found elsewhere in the world, this is a space meant for contemplation rather than congregation. The ceiling is low enough that most visitors must stoop in places, and the walls are close enough to touch on either side. Silver and gold ornaments now mark specific spots within the cave, places where tradition holds that St. John leaned against the stone wall where he knelt in prayer, where his disciple Prochoros sat with stylus and parchment to record the visions as they came. The rock itself tells a story that began long before any human foot touched this island. The cave sits within volcanic formations that began emerging from the Aegean Sea during the late Miocene period, approximately 8 to 10 million years ago. Patmos formed through a series of volcanic eruptions that built layer upon layer of lava flows, creating the rugged landscape that characterizes the island today. The specific rocks surrounding the Cave of the Apocalypse are composed primarily of volcanic breccia and andesite, materials that formed when ancient volcanic explosions hurled molten rock fragments high into the air, where they cooled and fell back to Earth in jumbled, chaotic layers. These volcanic processes created the natural cave systems that honeycomb parts of the island. The Cave of the Apocalypse formed through a combination of volcanic gas bubbles that left voids in cooling lava and subsequent erosion by groundwater seeping through fractures in the rock. Over millions of years, these processes carved out the modest chamber that would become one of the most significant religious sites in the Christian world. Long before the arrival of Christianity, ancient Greek and Roman inhabitants of the Aegean Islands recognized certain caves as sacred spaces. Archaeological evidence from Patmos suggests human habitation dating back to at least the 3rd millennium BCE. These early residents likely viewed natural caves as thresholds to the underworld, places where the boundary between the mortal realm and the divine became permeable. The island itself was known to ancient Greeks as a place of exile, its rocky terrain and limited resources making it suitable for banishing criminals and political prisoners far from the centres of civilization. The transformation of this particular cave from geological curiosity to sacred site began in 95 CE, during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. According to Christian tradition, John of Patmos, believed by many to be the Apostle John, the beloved disciple of Jesus, was exiled to this remote island because of his Christian preaching. Roman authorities considered Christianity a dangerous cult that threatened the stability of the empire, and exile to desolate islands was a common punishment for those who refused to renounce their faith. John was not alone in his exile. Historical accounts describe him as being accompanied by his young disciple Prochoros, who served as his scribe and assistant. The two men found shelter in the natural cave, which provided protection from the harsh Aegean weather while offering the solitude necessary for prayer and contemplation. It was in this humble stone chamber that John began experiencing the series of visions that would become the Book of Revelation. The process of receiving and recording these visions, as described in early Christian writings, was both mystical and intensely practical. John would enter states of deep spiritual ecstasy during which he claimed to see and hear divine messages. Prochoros, positioned near the cave entrance where natural light provided enough illumination for writing, would carefully transcribe John's words as the older man emerged from his visions to dictate what he had experienced. The impact of the book that emerged from this cave cannot be overstated. The revelation of John, also known as the Apocalypse, became the final book of the Christian New Testament and one of the most influential texts in Western literature. Its vivid imagery of cosmic battles between good and evil, its prophecies of end times, and its promises of ultimate divine victory have inspired countless generations of believers, artists, and visionaries. From medieval illuminated manuscripts to contemporary films, the symbols and stories born in this cave continue to shape human understanding of hope, fear, and transcendence. Early Christian pilgrims began visiting the cave within centuries of John's death. By the 4th century CE, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the site had gained recognition throughout the Christian world. Archaeological evidence shows that a small chapel was constructed over the cave entrance sometime between the 4th and 6th centuries CE, protecting the sacred site while allowing continued access for worship and pilgrimage. The medieval period saw the cave's transformation into a more elaborate religious complex. In 1088 CE, the Byzantine monk Hosios Christodoulos founded the monastery of St. John the Theologian on the hill above the cave. This fortress-like monastery became one of the most important centres of Orthodox Christian learning in the medieval world, its library preserving thousands of ancient manuscripts, and its scriptorium producing illuminated copies of religious texts. The monastery built around the cave reflects the site's growing importance in Christian spirituality. Byzantine architects designed the complex to protect both the physical cave and the spiritual experience of pilgrims who came to pray within it. The structures built into and around the natural rock formation create a seamless blend of human architecture and divine geology, with stone walls that seem to grow naturally from the volcanic bedrock. Scientific study of the cave began in earnest during the 19th century, when European archaeologists and geologists first applied systematic methods to understanding the site's history. Geological surveys revealed the volcanic processes that created the cave, while archaeological excavations uncovered evidence of continuous religious activity spanning nearly 2,000 years. Researchers discovered fragments of early Christian pottery, coins from various periods of Byzantine rule, and architectural elements from multiple phases of construction and renovation. Modern analysis has provided new insights into both the cave's formation and its historical significance. Geological dating techniques confirm that the cave formed through natural volcanic processes millions of years before human occupation. Chemical analysis of the rock walls has revealed no unusual properties that might have contributed to visionary experiences, suggesting that any mystical phenomena reported at the site result from spiritual rather than geological factors. Archaeological research has also illuminated the practical aspects of life in the cave during John's exile. Studies of ancient parchment fragments, ink compositions, and writing implements from the Byzantine period provide evidence for the traditional account of Prochoros serving as scribe for John's visions. The physical layout of the cave, with its areas of varying light levels and acoustic properties, supports the historical description of how the two men organized their daily routines of prayer, vision, and transcription. Contemporary pilgrimage to the Cave of the Apocalypse continues traditions that have persisted for nearly 2 millennia. Each year, thousands of visitors from around the world make the journey to Patmos, seeking spiritual connection in the place where one of Christianity's most important texts was born. The experience remains remarkably intimate. The cave's small size means that only a few people can enter at once, creating moments of profound quiet and contemplation that mirror what John and Prochoros might have experienced centuries ago. The ongoing preservation of the site presents unique challenges that blend archaeological conservation with spiritual stewardship. The cave's delicate volcanic rock requires careful monitoring to prevent erosion from increased tourism, while the religious significance of the site demands that preservation efforts respect its continuing role as a place of active worship. Modern technology allows researchers to study the cave's structure using non-invasive methods that protect both the rock formations and the sacred atmosphere that pilgrims come to experience. Climate change poses new threats to the site's long-term preservation. Rising sea levels and changing weather patterns in the Mediterranean could affect the island's groundwater systems, potentially altering the chemical balance that has preserved the cave's volcanic rocks for millions of years. Research teams are now studying how environmental changes might impact not only the physical structure of the cave, but also the broader ecosystem of the island that has supported continuous human habitation for thousands of years. The relationship between scientific understanding and spiritual significance at the Cave of the Apocalypse continues to evolve as researchers develop new methods for studying sacred sites. Rather than diminishing the cave's religious importance, geological and archaeological research has enhanced appreciation for the remarkable convergence of natural processes and human experience that made this small chamber the birthplace of one of literature's most enduring works. Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. What happens when the earth decides to mirror the sky? When the ground beneath your feet disappears and you find yourself walking through clouds suspended between two infinities? On the high plateau of Bolivia, at an altitude where the air itself feels thin and precious, lies a place that transforms reality into something so impossible that your brain struggles to process what your eyes are seeing. This is Salar de Uyuni during the rainy season, the world's largest mirror, where the very concept of solid ground becomes negotiable. The first sensation that hits you as you step onto the salt flat is the crunch beneath your feet. Each step produces a sharp, crystalline sound that echoes across the vast expanse, the sound of millions of salt crystals being compressed under your weight. During the dry season, this sound is constant, like walking across fresh snow made of minerals. But when the rains come and transform the Salar into its legendary mirror, your footsteps change to soft splashes, each one sending ripples racing away from you in perfect concentric circles that seem to disappear into infinity. The air at 12,000 feet above sea level carries a bite that penetrates straight to your lungs. Each breath feels thinner, less substantial than what your body expects. The altitude creates a lightheaded sensation that makes the surreal landscape feel even more dreamlike. Your heart pounds harder just from walking across the flat surface, reminding you constantly that you are existing at the very edge of where humans can comfortably survive. But it's the visual assault that truly overwhelms every other sense. When the seasonal rains create that perfect mirror effect, the entire world turns inside out. The sky extends endlessly downward beneath your feet, while clouds drift both above and below you simultaneously. Your brain, evolved to process a world with clear distinctions between earth and air, simply cannot make sense of what it's seeing. You're walking on sky, standing in clouds, suspended in a space that exists nowhere else on Earth. The silence is profound and disturbing. Unlike the ocean, which this place resembles during mirror season, there are no waves, no constant rush of water movement. The thin layer of water that creates the mirror effect is perfectly still, broken only by your own movement or the occasional breath of wind that sends tiny ripples racing across the surface for miles. In this silence, you become hyper-aware of your own breathing, your heartbeat, the sound of your clothes rustling with each movement. The temperature shifts are sudden and extreme. During the day, the salt surface absorbs solar radiation and becomes almost too hot to touch, even through thick-soled boots. The white salt crystals reflect light so intensely that sunglasses become essential protection, not just comfort. But as soon as the sun begins to set, the temperature plummets dramatically. The thin air at this altitude cannot hold heat, and the vast expanse of salt and water begins radiating that stored thermal energy back into space at an alarming rate. When you kneel to touch the salt surface, your fingers encounter textures that seem impossible. In dry areas, the salt has formed perfect hexagonal patterns, each crystal formation fitting together like a geological jigsaw puzzle. The surface feels rough and sharp, with edges that can cut skin if you're not careful. But where water covers the salt, your hand passes through what appears to be solid cloud, creating ripples in the sky beneath your feet that propagate outward until they fade into the distance. The mirror effect plays havoc with your depth perception and spatial awareness. Objects that appear to be just a few meters away turn out to be kilometers distant. People walking on the salt flat seem to be floating in midair, their reflections creating the illusion that identical figures are walking both above and below an invisible surface. Your brain constantly struggles to determine which is the real person and which is the reflection, creating a disorienting sense of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The taste of the air itself is salty. Every breath carries microscopic salt particles lifted by evaporation and wind, coating your lips and tongue with the mineral flavour of ancient seas. This constant, subtle taste creates an almost oceanic sensation, even though you're hundreds of miles from any coast. The salt gets into everything, your hair, your clothes, the grooves of your camera equipment, creating a physical memory of the place that will linger long after you leave. During sunrise and sunset, the sensory experience becomes even more intense. The salt flat acts like a massive light amplifier, doubling the illumination by reflecting every ray of sunlight. Colours become supersaturated. Pinks and oranges so vivid they seem artificial, blues so deep they appear to have been painted directly onto the sky. The mirror effect means you're surrounded by these colours, immersed in them completely as they reflect endlessly between earth and sky. The psychological impact of standing in this infinite mirror is immediate and profound. Many visitors report feeling simultaneously insignificant and expanded, as if their consciousness is stretching to fill the vast space around them. The complete absence of familiar reference points, no trees, no buildings, no horizon line during mirror conditions, creates a sensation that psychologists recognize as perceptual release. Your brain, deprived of normal visual cues, begins creating its own interpretations of the sensory input. leading to almost hallucinogenic experiences. The scale of the place affects human perception in ways that are difficult to describe. Standing in the middle of Salar de Uyuni, you're further from any solid object than you can be almost anywhere else on Earth's surface. The salt flat stretches 4,086 square miles, larger than some countries, creating a sense of space that most humans never experience. This vastness triggers what environmental psychologists call the overview effect, a cognitive shift that occurs when humans perceive Earth from a radically different perspective. The science behind the mirror effect involves a precise combination of factors that occur nowhere else on Earth with such perfection. The salt flat sits atop an ancient lake bed that is extraordinarily level. The entire surface varies by less than 3 feet across its massive expanse. This incredible flatness, combined with seasonal rainfall that creates a uniform layer of water just centimeters deep, produces the most perfect natural mirror on the planet. The optical physics of this mirror are remarkable. Unlike artificial mirrors that reflect about 90% of light, the salt flat during mirror season reflects nearly 100% of the sky above it. The layer of water is thin enough to be perfectly transparent, while the white salt beneath provides complete reflection. The combination creates what optical scientists call a first surface mirror. Light reflects off the water's surface without distortion, creating perfect images of the sky above. The altitude amplifies every aspect of the experience. At 12,000 feet, the atmosphere is significantly thinner, allowing more intense solar radiation to reach the surface. This creates more vivid colours and sharper contrasts. The reduced atmospheric pressure also affects how light travels and bends, contributing to the optical illusions that make distant objects appear to float and creating the sensation of existing in multiple dimensions. The human fascination with places like Salar de Uyuni taps into deep evolutionary responses to landscape and space. Our ancestors evolved in environments with clear distinctions between ground and sky, solid and void here and there. When these distinctions dissolve, as they do in the mirror effect, our brains are forced to process entirely novel sensory information. This cognitive challenge triggers intense curiosity and wonder, emotions that were crucial for human survival and exploration. The mirror effect also activates what neuroscientists call mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe the same action reflected back to us. Standing on the salt flat mirror, seeing your own movements perfectly reflected beneath your feet creates unprecedented stimulation of these neural pathways. Your brain is simultaneously processing yourself as actor and observer, creating a heightened state of self-awareness that many visitors describe as almost meditative. Recent research into the psychological effects of extreme landscapes has shown that places like Salar de Uyuni can produce measurable changes in brain activity. The combination of sensory overload and sensory deprivation, overwhelming visual input combined with the absence of familiar reference points, triggers the release of neurotransmitters associated with transcendent experiences. This neurochemical response explains why many people describe their time on the salt flat as spiritual or life-changing. The salt flat's ability to create perfect optical illusions also demonstrates the extent to which human perception is constructed, rather than simply received. What we think we see is actually our brain's interpretation of light patterns, and places like Salar de Uyuni reveal how easily this interpretive system can be overwhelmed or confused. Standing in the mirror, you become acutely aware of the difference between what exists and what you perceive, making the salt flat a natural laboratory for understanding consciousness itself. The ongoing preservation of these sensory experiences faces challenges from climate change and increased tourism. The precise rainfall patterns that create the mirror effect are shifting as global weather systems change. The delicate salt formations that produce the distinctive textures and sounds of the dry season are being affected by the thousands of feet that traverse them each year. Scientists are studying how to maintain the natural processes that create these extraordinary sensory experiences while managing the human impact of those who come to witness them. Giant's Causeway, Northern Ireland. In the natural world, perfect geometry is rare. Nature tends toward curves, organic shapes, random patterns that follow no mathematical rule. Yet along the wild northern coast of Ireland stands proof that the Earth itself can be a master architect, creating structures so precise they appear to be the work of conscious design rather than geological accident. Here, 40,000 interlocking basalt columns rise from the sea like the pipes of an enormous stone organ, each one a near-perfect hexagon that fits together with its neighbours in mathematical harmony that would challenge the most skilled stonemason. The Giant's Causeway represents one of Earth's most remarkable examples of what geologists call columnar jointing, a phenomenon that occurs when cooling lava contracts in such a specific way that it creates these geometric masterpieces. But while similar basalt column formations exist scattered across the globe, nowhere else combines the scale, perfection and accessibility that makes the Giant's Causeway truly unique among the world's geological wonders. The closest comparison to Ireland's basalt wonder can be found nearly 6,000 miles away in California's Sierra Nevada mountains, where Devil's Postpile National Monument preserves another spectacular example of columnar basalt. Like the Giant's Causeway, Devil's Postpile formed when lava flows cooled and contracted, creating hexagonal columns that stand like a natural colonnade in the mountain wilderness. The California Formation contains approximately 3,000 columns, impressive by any standard, but dwarfed by the 40,000 columns that make up the Irish site. The key difference lies in the cooling conditions that formed each site. Devil's Postpile formed from a single lava flow that cooled relatively quickly at high altitude, creating columns that are remarkably uniform in size, most measuring about 2 feet in diameter and rising 60 feet high. The rapid cooling created precise hexagonal shapes with clean, sharp edges that look almost machine-cut. However, the site lacks the dramatic seaside setting and the range of column sizes that make the Giant's Causeway so visually spectacular. Iceland offers perhaps the most extensive collection of basalt columns in the world, scattered across an island that is essentially one massive volcanic laboratory. At Svartifoss Waterfall, columns of dark basalt create a natural amphitheatre behind cascading water, while at Reynisfjara Beach, columns have been broken down by Atlantic waves into dramatic coastal formations. The Icelandic columns formed under conditions similar to those in Ireland, multiple lava flows cooling at different rates in a maritime environment. Yet the Icelandic formations, while numerous and beautiful, lack the concentrated perfection found at the Giant's Causeway. Iceland's columns vary widely in size, shape and orientation due to the island's ongoing volcanic activity and the varying conditions under which different flows cooled. Some areas show perfectly formed hexagons, while others display irregular polygonal shapes or columns that curve and twist as they fusioned. The Giant's Causeway, by contrast, represents a single geological event that created remarkably consistent results across its entire extent. In Scotland, Fingal's Cave on the island of Staffa showcases basalt columns formed by the same volcanic event that created the Giant's Causeway. The two sites are geological siblings, formed when the same massive lava flows spread across what is now the North Atlantic region. Fingal's Cave demonstrates how these columns can create natural architecture. The regular spacing and height of the basalt pillars form a natural cathedral with extraordinary acoustic properties. However, Fingal's Cave represents only a tiny fraction of the original formation, and the columns are partially submerged, limiting access and visibility. The Giant's Causeway provides a complete cross-section of the entire columnar formation, from columns that disappear beneath the sea to others that rise 40 feet above the high tide line, allowing visitors to understand the full scope of this geological phenomenon. What makes the Giant's Causeway unique among all these formations is the specific conditions under which it formed 50 to 60 million years ago. During the Paleogene period, the region that is now Northern Ireland sat atop one of the most active volcanic zones on Earth. The North Atlantic was beginning to open as tectonic plates pulled apart, creating massive fissure eruptions that poured basaltic lava across thousands of square miles. The Giant's Causeway formed during a period of particularly intense volcanic activity when multiple lava flows of nearly identical composition cooled under almost identical conditions. The lava was unusually low in silica content, making it extremely fluid and allowing it to spread in uniform layers across the landscape. As each layer cooled, it contracted at precisely the rate needed to create hexagonal fracture patterns, the most efficient way for contracting material to release stress uniformly across a flat surface. The cooling rate was crucial to the formation's perfection. The lava cooled slowly enough to allow large, well-formed crystals to develop, but quickly enough to prevent the formation from being disrupted by continued volcanic activity. This created basalt with a very uniform composition and structure, which contracted uniformly as it cooled. The result was columns so regularly shaped and so consistently sized that they appear to have been deliberately engineered. The mathematical precision of the hexagonal pattern reflects fundamental principles of physics and materials science. When a homogeneous material contracts uniformly, it naturally forms hexagonal patterns because this shape allows the most efficient packing with the least energy expenditure. The same principle governs the formation of honeycomb cells by bees and the hexagonal patterns that form when mud dries in a uniform layer. Recent scientific analysis has revealed additional factors that contributed to the Giant's Causeway's exceptional regularity. The lava flows occurred during a period of stable climate with consistent temperature and humidity conditions that affected how the rock cooled. The absence of significant wind patterns or weather disturbances during the cooling period allowed the geometric patterns to form without disruption. The site's coastal location also contributed to its preservation and perfection. Wave action over millions of years has cleaned and polished the columns, removing weathered material and revealing the precise geometric shapes beneath. This natural polishing process has enhanced the visual impact of the formation, while exposing cross-sections that allow scientists to study the internal structure of the columns. The broader implications of the Giant's Causeway extend far beyond its visual spectacle. The formation provides crucial evidence for understanding large-scale volcanic processes and their effects on global climate. The volcanic activity that created the causeway was part of the North Atlantic Igneous Province, one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. This period of massive volcanism may have contributed to significant climate change during the Paleogene period, including a period of global warming known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Studies of the basalt composition at Giant's Causeway have revealed information about the deep mantle processes that drive volcanic activity. The chemical signature of the lava indicates it originated from mantle plumes, columns of hot material rising from deep within the Earth. Understanding these processes helps scientists predict future volcanic activity and its potential impacts on global climate. The formation also serves as a natural laboratory for studying how materials behave under stress. The hexagonal fracture patterns provide insights that have applications in materials science, architecture, and engineering. The principles governing columnar jointing are now applied in the design of concrete structures, where controlled contraction joints prevent random cracking by creating predetermined failure patterns. Contemporary research at the Giant's Causeway continues to reveal new aspects of its formation and preservation. Advanced imaging techniques have allowed scientists to map the internal structure of the columns in 3 dimensions, revealing variations in crystal orientation and composition that were invisible to earlier researchers. These studies are helping to refine models of how large-scale volcanic processes create such uniform results. Climate change research has also found applications at the Causeway, where scientists study how changing sea levels and storm patterns affect the erosion and preservation of the columns. The site serves as a natural monitoring station for understanding how coastal geological formations respond to changing environmental conditions, providing data that helps predict the fate of similar formations worldwide. Socotra Island, Yemen. Stepping onto Socotra Island feels like arriving on an alien world that happens to be orbiting the same sun as Earth. The landscape before you defies every expectation of what an island should look like. Massive bottle trees with swollen trunks rise from rocky plains, like sculptures from a surreal dream. Dragon's blood trees spread their umbrella-shaped crowns across mountainsides, their dark red resin seeping from cuts in the bark like the island itself is bleeding. Desert roses bloom impossibly large and pink from seemingly barren ground, while cucumber trees with thick, fleshy branches stretch toward a sky that seems more vivid blue than anywhere else on the planet. The isolation is immediate and profound. You're 350 kilometers from the nearest mainland, surrounded by the deep blue waters of the Arabian Sea. The 50,000 people who call this island home speak Socotraki, an ancient language with no written form that exists nowhere else on Earth. Villages of stone and coral houses dot coastlines, where pristine beaches stretch for miles without a single footprint. This is a place where time moves differently, where evolution has been left alone to create its own masterpieces, and where the very air seems charged with the magic of pure isolation. The story of how this biological treasure chest came to exist begins deep in geological time, when the Earth looked nothing like the world we know today. 600 million years ago, the rocks that would eventually become Socotra were part of a vast supercontinent called Gondwana, which included what we now know as South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India. The ancient basement rocks of Socotra, formed during this time as part of the Arabian-Nubian Shield, created through massive tectonic processes that built the foundations of continents. For hundreds of millions of years, this landmass drifted across the globe as part of Gondwana, experiencing climates ranging from tropical seas to ice ages. The limestone formations that cap much of modern Socotra were laid down during the Mesozoic era, when the area was covered by warm, shallow seas teeming with marine life. These ancient seafloors, compressed over millions of years, would later form the karst landscapes and cave systems that characterize the island today. The critical moment in Socotra's biological history came approximately 18 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, when the opening of the Gulf of Aden began to separate the Arabian Peninsula from Africa. As tectonic forces pulled the landmasses apart, creating the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, Socotra became isolated from the mainland. This separation was not sudden. It occurred over millions of years as sea levels rose and land bridges disappeared, gradually cutting off the flow of plants and animals between the island and the mainland. The timing of this separation was crucial for creating Socotra's unique flora and fauna. The island became isolated during a period when the climate was more humid and when many plant and animal lineages were still relatively plastic in their evolutionary development. Species that became stranded on the island had millions of years to evolve in complete isolation, developing adaptations to the island's specific climatic and geological conditions without any genetic input from their mainland relatives. The first humans to encounter this evolutionary laboratory may have arrived as early as 4,000 years ago, based on recent genetic studies of the current population. These early settlers likely came from the Arabian mainland, possibly following seasonal migration patterns or driven by drought and conflict to seek new lands across the sea. Archaeological evidence suggests continuous human habitation from around 1000 BCE, with ancient tombs and settlement sites scattered across the island, providing glimpses into these early communities. The indigenous people who developed on Socotra created a unique culture perfectly adapted to the island's challenging environment. They developed sophisticated knowledge systems for utilizing the island's endemic plants for medicine, construction, and daily life. The dragon's blood tree resin became a valuable trade commodity, prized throughout the ancient world for its medicinal properties and use as a dye. The Socotra people learned to harvest this resin sustainably, making careful cuts in the bark during specific seasons to avoid damaging the slow-growing trees. The island's strategic location in the Indian Ocean shipping lanes brought it to the attention of various foreign powers throughout history. Ancient Greek and Roman texts mention Socotra as a source of exotic goods, particularly aloe and dragon's blood resin. The island appears in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century CE navigation manual that describes it as inhabited by Arabs and Indians who spoke both Arabic and Indian languages. Portuguese explorers arrived in 1507 and briefly occupied the island, seeking to control Indian Ocean trade routes. However, the island's remote location and limited resources made permanent colonial control impractical. The Mara Sultans of southeastern Yemen eventually established authority over Socotra, ruling it as part of their mainland territories while allowing the island considerable autonomy to maintain its traditional ways of life. The modern scientific discovery of Socotra's biological treasures began in the 19th century, when European botanists and zoologists first began systematic exploration of the island. The British botanist Isaac Bailey Balfour conducted the first comprehensive botanical survey in 1880, documenting hundreds of species unknown to science. His work revealed that Socotra harboured one of the highest levels of plant endemism of any island on Earth, with over 1/3 of its plant species found nowhere else in the world. Subsequent expeditions throughout the 20th century continued to reveal the extraordinary nature of Socotra's biodiversity. Researchers discovered that the island's isolation had created not just endemic species, but entire endemic genera and families of plants and animals, The dragon's blood tree represents an entire genus, Dracaena cinnabari, that exists only on Socotra. The cucumber tree, desert rose and bottle tree are all examples of species that have evolved unique adaptations to the island's arid climate and seasonal rainfall patterns. Zoological studies revealed similar patterns of endemism among the island's animal life. Over 90% of Socotra's land snail species are endemic, representing millions of years of isolated evolution in the island's diverse microclimates. The Socotra sunbird, Egyptian vulture subspecies, and various reptile species all show significant differences from their mainland relatives, indicating long periods of isolated evolution. Recent genetic studies have provided new insights into the timing and patterns of evolutionary divergence on Socotra. DNA analysis of endemic species suggests that most major evolutionary splits between Socotra species and their mainland relatives occurred between 6 and 18 million years ago, consistent with the geological evidence for the island's separation from Arabia. However, some lineages show evidence of more recent colonization, suggesting that occasional dispersal events continued to bring new species to the island, even after its initial isolation. The future of Socotra's unique ecosystems faces unprecedented challenges in the modern era. Climate change is altering rainfall patterns that have remained stable for millions of years, threatening species that evolved under very specific climatic conditions. The iconic dragon's blood trees are particularly vulnerable, as they require precise combinations of seasonal rainfall and dry periods that may be disrupted by changing weather patterns. Increasing human population and economic development pressures are also affecting the island's delicate ecological balance. Overgrazing by goats and camels is preventing the regeneration of endemic plants, while development projects threaten critical habitats. The introduction of non-native species, whether intentional or accidental, poses risks to ecosystems that evolved without certain types of predators, competitors, or diseases. Conservation efforts are now racing against time to document and preserve Socotra's biological heritage. UNESCO designated the Socotra archipelago as a World Heritage Site in 2008, recognizing its outstanding universal value for biodiversity conservation. International research programs are working to complete comprehensive biological surveys before species are lost to environmental changes or habitat destruction. The establishment of protected areas and conservation programs faces the challenge of balancing ecological preservation with the needs of local communities who have depended on the island's resources for thousands of years. Traditional management practices developed by the Socotra people often prove sustainable over long time periods, but modern pressures require new approaches to conservation that integrate traditional knowledge with contemporary scientific understanding. Research into climate adaptation strategies for Socotra's endemic species has become a priority as temperatures rise and precipitation patterns shift. Scientists are studying how species like the dragon's blood tree might be able to adapt to changing conditions, while also exploring options for assisted migration or captive breeding programs for the most vulnerable species. Bloodfall's Antarctica. Something's bleeding on the coldest continent on Earth. In the heart of Antarctica, where temperatures drop to -40 degrees Celsius and life should be impossible, a waterfall of crimson liquid seeps from the edge of Taylor Glacier like an open wound in the ice. The colour is so vivid, so unnaturally red against the pristine white landscape, that it appears the continent itself is hemorrhaging. This is blood falls, a phenomenon so striking and inexplicable that for over a century it has challenged everything scientists thought they knew about life in extreme environments. The mystery began on a summer day in 1911 when Australian geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor was exploring the McMurdo Dry Valleys as part of Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition. Taylor and his team were mapping the region's unique ice-free valleys when they encountered something that defied explanation. At the terminus of what would later be named Taylor Glacier, they discovered a 5-story-high waterfall of blood-red liquid flowing from beneath the ice and staining the white glacier with what looked like fresh blood. Taylor's initial reaction was one of scientific puzzlement mixed with visceral unease. In his expedition notes, he described the phenomenon as a glacier weeping tears of blood, and struggled to find rational explanations for what he was witnessing. In the sterile, frozen world of Antarctica, where colour itself is rare, this cascade of deep red liquid seemed to violate the fundamental laws of nature. The waterfall appeared intermittently, sometimes flowing freely, sometimes reduced to a trickle, but always maintaining its disturbing crimson hue. The discovery was documented with photographs and samples, but in 1911 the technology didn't exist to fully analyse what was causing the extraordinary coloration. Taylor's team could only note that the liquid appeared to be water mixed with some unknown substance that gave it the appearance of blood. The samples they collected would have to wait decades before proper chemical analysis could reveal their secrets. For nearly 50 years, the prevailing scientific theory was that the red colour came from red algae living in the water. This explanation seemed logical. Many bodies of water around the world occasionally turn red due to algal blooms, and algae were known to survive in extreme conditions. The theory suggested that during Antarctica's brief summer months, algae and meltwater beneath the glacier would multiply rapidly, creating the red coloration before dying off as temperatures dropped. However, this algae theory began to unravel in the 1960s and 1970s as more sophisticated chemical analysis became available. Scientists testing samples from bloodfalls found high concentrations of iron, but no significant algae populations. The plot thickened further when researchers realised that the water flowing from bloodfalls was hypersaline, nearly 4 times saltier than seawater. This discovery raised even more questions. How could such salty water exist beneath a glacier? Where was all this iron coming from? And if there were no algae, what was creating the blood-red colour? The breakthrough came in 2003 when glaciologist Jill McCookie and her team from Harvard University made a discovery that revolutionised understanding of both blood falls and life on Earth. Using advanced DNA sequencing techniques, they analysed water samples from the falls and discovered something extraordinary. The water was teeming with life, but not the kind of life anyone expected to find. Deep beneath Taylor Glacier, sealed away from sunlight and oxygen for potentially millions of years, was a hidden lake of ancient seawater. This subglacial lake, trapped when sea levels dropped and the glacier advanced, had become a time capsule of marine life from a period when Antarctica had a very different climate. The lake was not just salty, it was hypersaline, with salt concentrations so high they prevented the water from freezing even at temperatures well below 0 degrees Celsius. But the most remarkable discovery was the bacterial community living in this buried ocean. McCookie's team identified unique strains of bacteria that had evolved in complete isolation for millions of years, developing metabolic processes that allowed them to survive in conditions that would kill most life on Earth. These bacteria had learned to live without sunlight or oxygen, using sulfur compounds and iron minerals in the water to power their biological processes. The mystery of the red colour finally made sense. The bacteria were metabolizing iron in the subglacial lake, converting it from one chemical form to another as part of their energy production. When this iron-rich water occasionally seeped out through cracks in the glacier and came into contact with oxygen in the atmosphere, the iron oxidized rapidly, creating iron oxide, essentially rust. The waterfall wasn't bleeding blood, it was bleeding rust created by ancient bacteria living in a hidden world beneath the ice. This revelation had profound implications far beyond solving a curious Antarctic mystery. The discovery of a thriving microbial ecosystem in such extreme conditions expanded the boundaries of where scientists believed life could exist. If bacteria could survive for millions of years in the frozen, oxygen-free hypersaline environment beneath Taylor Glacier, similar life might exist in comparable environments throughout the solar system. Recent research has revealed even more layers to the bloodfalls mystery. In 2017, scientists using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced instruments mapped the entire subglacial hydrological system that feeds the falls. They discovered a complex network of underground rivers and smaller lakes connecting to the main subglacial lake, creating what amounts to an underground river system flowing beneath the glacier. The research also revealed that the system is much more dynamic than previously thought. The flow of blood falls varies with seasonal temperature changes and tidal forces, suggesting that the subglacial lake system is more connected to surface and oceanic conditions than anyone had imagined. The bacteria living in this system may be actively responding to these environmental changes, adjusting their metabolic processes and iron oxidation rates in ways that affect both the flow and intensity of the red coloration. Further study of the bacterial communities has revealed their remarkable adaptability and potential longevity. Some genetic analyses suggest that these organisms may have been isolated for up to 5 million years, evolving unique biochemical pathways that allow them to extract energy from chemical reactions involving iron, sulfur, and organic compounds in the water. These bacteria represent some of the most extreme extremophiles known to science, organisms that thrive in conditions previously thought to be uninhabitable. The ongoing research at Bloodfalls continues to yield new insights into both the specific phenomenon and broader questions about life in extreme environments. Scientists are now using the site as a natural laboratory for studying how life might survive on Mars, Europa, or other worlds where liquid water might exist beneath ice, or in other extreme conditions. However, many mysteries about Bloodfalls remain unsolved. Scientists still don't fully understand what controls the timing and intensity of the outflow events that create the waterfall. The exact age of the subglacial lake system remains uncertain, with estimates ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions of years. The complete extent of the underground river network beneath Taylor Glacier is still being mapped, and each new survey reveals additional complexity in the system. Perhaps most intriguingly, researchers are still discovering new species of bacteria in Bloodfall samples, suggesting that the microbial diversity of the subglacial ecosystem is far greater than initially realized. Each new organism discovered adds pieces to the puzzle of how life can adapt to extreme conditions and survive in isolation for geological time periods. Climate change now poses new questions for Bloodfalls research. As global temperatures rise and Antarctic ice begins to change, scientists are monitoring how these changes might affect the delicate balance of the subglacial ecosystem that creates this remarkable phenomenon. The ancient bacteria that have survived in isolation for millions of years may face unprecedented challenges as their frozen world begins to shift in response to human-caused environmental change. Spotted Lake, Canada. Water holds memory, but some lakes hold the memory of the Earth itself. In the dry hills of British Columbia's Okanagan Valley, where summer heat transforms the landscape into patterns that seem painted by invisible hands, lies a body of water that changes its very identity with the seasons. The indigenous peoples of this land have a name for it, Klilxw, which translates roughly as Sacred Lake of Many Colours. The rest of the world knows it as Spotted Lake, and for centuries it has been a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds becomes as fluid as the mineral-rich waters themselves. The story of Spotted Lake begins with the oral traditions of the Silex people of the Okanagan Nation, who have lived in this valley for thousands of years. In their teachings, Klilxw is not merely a geographical feature but a sacred pharmacy created by the Creator to heal all ailments of body and spirit. Each of the lake's distinctive spots, numbered at 365 in traditional accounts, one for each day of the year, possesses its own unique healing properties and spiritual significance. The lake's sacred status was not based on superstition, but on generations of empirical knowledge about the healing properties of its mineral-rich waters. Different sections of the lake contained varying concentrations of magnesium sulfate, calcium, sodium sulfate, and other minerals that created natural remedies for specific conditions. Warriors would soak their battle wounds in pools rich in magnesium to reduce inflammation. Elders with joint pain would seek out calcium-rich sections to ease their aches. Women giving birth would be brought to certain spots believed to ease labour pains and promote healing. The Silex developed sophisticated knowledge about how to harvest and use the lake's medicinal minerals. During summer months, when evaporation created thick crusts of various salts, they would carefully collect different mineral deposits for year-round use. Each family group held traditional knowledge about which spots provided remedies for specific ailments, creating a medical system based on intimate understanding of the lake's changing chemistry. So sacred was Klilxw that tribal protocols governed its use. Visitors from distant tribes would request permission before approaching the lake, bringing gifts and following ceremonial procedures that honoured both the healing waters and the Silex people who served as their guardians. The lake was neutral ground where enemies could gather peacefully to seek healing, unified by their common need for the water's medicinal properties. This traditional world began changing in the late 19th century as European settlers arrived in the Okanagan Valley. In 1912, Ernest Smith, a settler and entrepreneur, purchased the land surrounding Spotted Lake, transforming it from sacred commons into private property. Smith initially showed little interest in the lake's unique properties, viewing it primarily as a curiosity that might attract tourists to the remote valley. Everything changed during World War I, when global demand for minerals crucial to ammunition production soared. Chemical analysis of Spotted Lake's deposits revealed extraordinarily high concentrations of sodium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, and other compounds essential for manufacturing explosives. Smith realized that his peculiar lake was actually a vast mineral mine, and he began industrial extraction operations that would continue for decades. Chinese laborers were brought in to harvest the mineral deposits during summer months, when evaporation left thick crusts of salt covering the lake bed. Working under dangerous conditions in extreme heat, they scraped tons of minerals from the dried lake surface, loading them onto trains bound for munitions factories across North America. The pristine, sacred lake became an industrial site, where the roar of machinery replaced the quiet prayers of traditional healing ceremonies. The industrial exploitation devastated the Silex people, who watched helplessly as their sacred pharmacy was strip-mined to feed the war machine. Traditional access to the lake was cut off, and generations of indigenous knowledge about its healing properties became increasingly difficult to maintain and pass on. The spiritual and cultural significance of Kawah Ijen was dismissed by the industrial operators as primitive superstition, irrelevant to the serious business of mineral extraction. It was during this period of industrial exploitation that scientists first began systematic study of Spotted Lake's remarkable properties. Military chemists analysing the mineral composition discovered that the lake contained one of the world's highest concentrations of sulfate salts, with some sections reaching saturation levels that created unique crystallization patterns. The distinctive spots that gave the lake its English name were actually colonies of different mineral compounds, each precipitating out of solution at different rates and temperatures. Research revealed the complex hydrogeology that created the lake's unique characteristics. Spotted Lake sits in a closed basin with no outlet, fed by underground springs that carry dissolved minerals from deep geological formations. As water evaporates during summer months, these minerals become increasingly concentrated, eventually crystallizing in the distinctive polygonal patterns that create the lake's spotted appearance. The colors of different spots, white, yellow, green, blue, reflect the specific mineral composition of each pool. The scientific investigation intensified after World War II as researchers recognized Spotted Lake as a unique natural laboratory. Studies revealed that the lake's extreme salinity, up to 10 times saltier than seawater in some spots, created conditions similar to those found on Mars or other planets where hypersaline environments might harbor life. The lake became a testing ground for understanding how extremophile organisms survive in conditions previously thought uninhabitable. Modern microbiology research has vindicated many traditional Silex beliefs about the lake's healing properties. Scientists have discovered that different mineral pools harbor distinct communities of halophilic, salt-loving bacteria and archaea, some of which produce compounds with antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. The varying mineral compositions that traditional healers recognized for their different therapeutic effects actually do create distinct biochemical environments with measurable medicinal properties. The battle for the lake's future reached a turning point in the 1990s when the Okanagan Indian Band learned that Smith's descendants planned to develop the property as a spa resort. Recognizing the threat to their sacred site, the band launched a decades-long campaign to reacquire KLXW and restore it to traditional stewardship. The campaign combined legal action, public education, and cultural activism to raise awareness about the lake's significance. In 2001, after years of negotiation and fundraising, the Okanagan Indian Band successfully purchased Spotted Lake and the surrounding 22 hectares, returning the sacred site to Indigenous control for the first time in nearly a century. The acquisition was celebrated throughout Indian country as a victory for Indigenous rights and cultural preservation, demonstrating that sacred sites could be reclaimed even after decades of exploitation. The restoration of traditional stewardship has allowed for new forms of collaboration between Indigenous knowledge keepers and contemporary scientists. Research programs now combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern analytical techniques to understand the lake's properties more completely. Silex elders work with hydrogeologists to map seasonal changes in mineral concentration, while traditional healers collaborate with biochemists to study the medicinal compounds produced by the lake's unique bacterial communities. Current research has revealed that Spotted Lake represents one of the most extreme hypersaline environments on Earth, with conditions that may be analogous to ancient Mars or Jupiter's moon Europa. The lake has become a study site for astrobiologists investigating how life might survive in the harsh conditions of other worlds. NASA researchers have used Spotted Lake as a testing ground for instruments designed to detect signs of life on future Mars missions. The modern understanding of Spotted Lake reflects a synthesis of traditional knowledge and contemporary science that reveals the profound sophistication of indigenous relationships with the natural world. The SILIC's recognition of the lake's healing properties, their understanding of seasonal variations in mineral concentration, and their protocols for sustainable use all demonstrate scientific thinking that preceded formal European scientific methods by centuries. The lake stands as proof that indigenous knowledge systems represent sophisticated forms of empirical research deserving of respect and integration into contemporary scientific understanding. Today, Spotted Lake remains closed to public access, protected by the Okanagan Indian Band as both a sacred site and a unique ecological treasure. Visitors can view the lake from a distance, observing the spectacular spotted patterns that form during summer evaporation, but direct access is restricted to protect both the delicate mineral formations and the cultural integrity of this sacred space. Waitomo Glowworm Caves, New Zealand. Step into absolute darkness and prepare for your eyes to be fooled by what seems impossible. You're about to enter a world where the sky has moved underground, where thousands of tiny stars hang from stone ceilings, and where the very concept of what belongs above and what belongs below dissolves into wonder. This is the moment when you first encounter the glowworm grotto of Waitomo Caves in New Zealand, and your brain struggles to process what it's seeing as your small boat glides silently through water that reflects an entire galaxy that shouldn't exist. The journey into this underground cosmos begins long before you see the lights. As you descend into the limestone caverns, the temperature drops suddenly, wrapping around you like cool silk. The air becomes thick and humid, carrying the mineral scent of ancient rock and the subtle sweetness of underground water. Every sound changes character in the cave's natural acoustics. Your footsteps echo with a hollow resonance that speaks of vast spaces hidden in darkness, while whispered conversations carry farther than they should, as if the cave itself is listening. The limestone formations around you create their own sensory symphony. Stalactites hang like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces glistening with moisture that catches the dim artificial lighting. When you reach out to steady yourself against the smooth cave walls, your fingers encounter stone that has been polished by millions of years of water flow, cool and slightly damp to the touch. The rock feels alive, breathing with the cave's own rhythm of temperature and humidity fluctuations. Then comes the moment when all artificial light is extinguished, and you are plunged into a darkness so complete it feels solid. The silence that follows is not empty. It's full of subtle sounds you never notice in the lit world. The gentle drip of water from ceiling to pool creates a natural metronome. The soft splash of your boat's wake against the cave walls becomes almost musical. Your own breathing seems amplified, and you become aware of your heartbeat as it adjusts to this alien environment. But it's when your eyes finally adjust that the true magic begins. What appears at first to be a scattering of blue-green pinpricks slowly reveals itself as something far more complex and beautiful. The ceiling above you comes alive with thousands upon thousands of tiny lights, each one a perfect blue-green dot suspended in the darkness. As your night vision improves, you begin to see the threads, gossamer thin silk lines that hang down from each light like the rigging of invisible ships, creating a three-dimensional constellation that extends in every direction. The boat moves in perfect silence across the underground river, the only sounds being the gentle splash of water against the hull and the occasional drip echoing through the cavern. The glowworm's lights reflect in the dark water below, creating the illusion that you are floating through space between two identical starfields. Above you, below you, all around you, the lights seem infinite, stretching away into blackness that could contain entire universes. The quality of light itself is unlike anything you've experienced. Each glowworm produces a pure blue-green luminescence that seems to pulse gently, creating a living light show that changes constantly as individual larvae adjust their brightness. Some lights appear brighter than others, creating a natural hierarchy of illumination that guides your eye across patterns that seem almost intentional. The collective glow is bright enough to see by, but soft enough that it doesn't destroy the magical atmosphere of floating through an underground galaxy. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Your sense of scale becomes completely distorted. Are you in a small cave lit by tiny creatures, or are you drifting through cosmic space among distant stars? The darkness beyond the lights could conceal caverns the size of cathedrals, or spaces no larger than closets. There's no way to tell. This uncertainty creates a sensation of simultaneously feeling protected and exposed, intimate and infinite. The silence amplifies every sensation. Without the constant background noise of the surface world, you become hyper-aware of your body, the feeling of the boat beneath you, the cool air against your skin, the way your breathing synchronizes with the gentle rocking motion. The experience becomes meditative, almost hypnotic, as the regular pattern of lights and the gentle movement of the boat create a natural rhythm that seems to slow down time itself. The science behind this otherworldly spectacle reveals nature's ingenuity in its most elegant form. The lights you're seeing are produced by the larvae of Arachnocampa luminosa, a species of fungus gnat found only in New Zealand. These creatures have evolved one of the most sophisticated hunting strategies in the natural world, using bioluminescence and silk engineering to create deadly traps for flying insects. Each larva constructs a silk tube on the cave ceiling, then extrudes dozens of sticky fishing lines that hang down like a beaded curtain. The beads are droplets of mucus that contain powerful adhesive compounds, creating snares that can trap insects many times larger than the larva itself. The bioluminescent tail of each larva glows continuously, producing light through a chemical reaction involving luciferin and luciferase, the same compounds used by fireflies, but modified to produce the blue-green wavelength that penetrates water most effectively. The specific colour of the light is crucial to the hunting strategy. The blue-green wavelength at approximately 485 nanometers is visible to most flying insects, but it also matches the peak sensitivity of many insects' visual systems. The light acts as an irresistible beacon, drawing moths, flies, and other prey toward the nearly invisible silk snares. Once trapped in the sticky threads, prey animals trigger vibrations that alert the larva to begin hauling in its catch. The cave environment is perfectly suited to this hunting strategy. The constant high humidity, typically over 90%, keeps the silk threads flexible and the mucus droplets sticky. The stable temperature, usually around 14 degrees Celsius, provides optimal conditions for the chemical reactions that produce the light. The complete absence of air currents in the deep cave prevents the delicate fishing lines from tangling or breaking. The intensity of each larva's light varies based on hunger levels, age, and environmental conditions. Well-fed larvae produce dimmer light, while hungry ones glow more brightly to attract more prey. This creates the natural variation in brightness that gives the cave ceiling its dynamic, living appearance. The larvae can also adjust their light output in response to disturbances, dimming when they detect vibrations or movement that might indicate danger. The acoustic properties of the caves enhance the sensory experience in ways that most visitors don't consciously recognize. The limestone formations create natural sound chambers with very specific reverberation characteristics. Sounds in the frequency range of human voices are naturally amplified and sustained, while higher frequencies are absorbed, creating the hushed cathedral-like atmosphere that makes whispers carry and eliminates harsh echoes. The way sound travels through the cave also contributes to the sense of spatial disorientation. The curved surfaces of the limestone formations scatter sound waves in complex patterns, making it difficult to determine the exact size and shape of the space around you. This acoustic confusion combines with the visual effects of the glowworms to create the sensation of existing in a space that defies normal physical laws. Human fascination with places like the Waitomo glowworm caves taps into deep evolutionary responses to light and darkness that shaped our species' development. Our ancestors evolved under star-filled skies, and the pattern recognition systems in our brains are finely tuned to detect constellations and navigate by celestial objects. The glowworm display triggers these same neural pathways, creating an immediate sense of wonder and spatial awareness that feels both familiar and impossible. The cave environment also activates what psychologists call the fascination response, a state of effortless attention that occurs when we encounter environments that are both beautiful and mildly threatening. The combination of darkness, water, and the sensation of being underground triggers our ancestral awareness of caves as both shelter and danger, creating a heightened state of consciousness that makes the experience memorable and emotionally powerful. Recent neurological research has shown that experiences of natural beauty, particularly those involving patterns of light like the glowworm display, trigger the release of dopamine and other neurotransmitters associated with reward and wonder. The specific combination of darkness and bioluminescent light creates a sensory experience so rare in the modern world that it can produce measurable changes in brain activity, explaining why visitors consistently describe the cave tour as transformative or spiritual. The preservation of this sensory experience requires maintaining the precise environmental conditions that support both the glowworms and the cave formations. Modern monitoring systems continuously track temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide levels, and visitor numbers to ensure that the delicate balance of the cave ecosystem remains stable. Even small changes in air quality or temperature can affect the glowworm's behavior and light production, potentially altering the very experience that draws visitors from around the world. Climate change poses new challenges for maintaining these underground ecosystems. Changes in surface weather patterns can affect groundwater levels and cave ventilation systems, while increased extreme weather events could potentially alter the stable conditions that have supported the glowworm colonies for thousands of years. The ongoing research into cave microclimate management has become crucial for preserving not just the scientific value of these underground ecosystems, but the transcendent sensory experience that connects visitors to one of nature's most extraordinary light shows, Zhangjiajie National Forest Park, China. In the heart of China's Hunan province, something impossible rises from the earth. Towering pillars of sandstone stretch toward the heavens like the fingers of sleeping giants, each one standing in perfect isolation from its neighbours. More than 3,000 of these stone towers pierce the landscape, some reaching heights of over 1,000 feet. They appear to float above the mist-filled valleys, defying gravity and challenging everything we think we know about how mountains should look. This is Zhangjiajie National Forest Park, where reality seems borrowed from a dream. The pillars stand so tall and narrow that forests grow on their tops, creating hanging gardens suspended hundreds of feet above the ground. Clouds drift between them like silk ribbons, and when morning mist rises from the valleys, the peaks appear to hover in mid-air, disconnected from the earth below. It's no wonder that filmmakers chose this place as inspiration for the floating Hallelujah Mountains in the movie Avatar. But Zhangjiajie is not alone in our world. Across the globe, other places challenge our understanding of what stone can become. In the American Southwest, Utah's Arches National Park displays massive sandstone formations sculpted into impossible bridges and windows. Arizona's Monument Valley presents towering mazes and buttes that rise like ancient castles from the desert floor. Turkey's Cappadocia region offers fairy chimneys, tall, thin spires of volcanic rock topped with harder capstones that protect them from erosion. Yet none of these remarkable places quite match what we see in China. The Arches of Utah are magnificent, but they span horizontally across space. The mesas of Monument Valley are impressive, but they spread wide at their bases. Cappadocia's fairy chimneys are tall and thin, but they rarely exceed 200 feet in height. Zhangjiajie's pillars are different. They shoot straight up from the ground like arrows, some rising more than 1,000 feet while remaining incredibly narrow at their base. To understand what makes these Chinese stone forests so special, we need to travel back in time. About 380 million years ago, this region lay beneath an ancient sea. Layer after layer of quartz and sand settled on the ocean floor, compressed by the weight of water above. Over millions of years, these sediments transformed into quartz sandstone, a rock so hard and resistant that it would prove nearly indestructible. When the sea retreated and the land rose, the real magic began. Unlike limestone, which dissolves in acidic water, or volcanic rock, which crumbles under temperature changes, quartz sandstone stands firm against almost everything nature can throw at it. But it has one weakness: the natural cracks and joints that formed as the rock cooled and shifted. Water found its way into these hairline fractures, freezing in winter, expanding, creating slightly larger cracks for the next freeze cycle. This process, repeated over millions of years, worked like a master sculptor's chisel. Water carved along the joint lines, creating deep, narrow canyons between blocks of stone. As the valleys deepened, The blocks became isolated pillars. But here's what makes Zhangjiajie truly unique. The joint patterns in this particular sandstone run almost perfectly vertical. In most places around the world, rock joints run in multiple directions, creating formations that are wide at the base and narrow at the top. But in Zhangjiajie, the joints are so consistently vertical that erosion has created pillars that are nearly the same width from bottom to top. The Venezuelan tepuis of South America might seem similar at first glance. These massive table mountains also formed from ancient sandstone and rise dramatically from the surrounding landscape. Mount Roraima, the most famous tepui, inspired Arthur Conan Doyle's novel The Lost World. But tepuis are fundamentally different from Zhangjiajie's pillars. They're enormous flat-topped mountains, some covering hundreds of square miles at their summits. They formed when softer rocks around them eroded away, leaving behind these resistant sandstone giants. Zhangjiajie's pillars, by contrast, are narrow spires that were carved out of solid rock by the precise action of water following joint lines. The stone formations of Australia's Blue Mountains present another interesting comparison. There, erosion has created dramatic cliff faces and isolated rock towers. But these formations developed in a different type of sandstone with horizontal bedding layers. This creates stepped profiles and broad flat areas where vegetation can take hold. Zhangjiajie's vertical joints created something entirely different. Smooth-sided pillars with flat tops that support isolated forest ecosystems. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Zhangjiajie's uniqueness lies in its scale. While other places might have a few dozen spectacular rock formations, Zhangjiajie contains more than 3,000 individual pillars spread across 150 square miles. This creates an entire landscape of vertical wonders, a stone forest where every turn reveals another impossible tower reaching for the sky. The biological implications of this geological wonder add another layer to its uniqueness. Each pillar top functions as an isolated ecosystem, cut off from its neighbours by hundreds of feet of empty air. Plants and animals living on these stone islands have evolved in isolation, creating pockets of biodiversity that exist nowhere else on Earth. Some pillar tops support trees that are genetically distinct from the same species growing on neighbouring towers, simply because they've been separated for so long that they've begun to evolve independently. This vertical isolation creates what scientists call sky islands, isolated habitats that function like oceanic islands, but suspended in air instead of surrounded by water. The concept helps us understand how species diversify and adapt when populations become separated by impassable barriers. In Zhangjiajie, those barriers happen to be vertical drops of several hundred feet. The formation continues today, though at a pace measured in geological time. Each winter freeze, each spring thaw, each monsoon rain contributes to the ongoing sculpture of these stone giants. Scientists studying the erosion rates estimate that the pillars grow relatively taller by about 1 millimeter every 1,000 years as the valleys around them deepen. In human terms, this is imperceptibly slow. In geological terms, it's remarkably fast. Lake Hillier, Australia. Picture this. You're flying over a remote island off the coast of Western Australia when something impossible catches your eye below. Among the dense green forest and golden beaches lies a perfect oval of water that shouldn't exist. It's not blue, not green, not brown like every other lake you've ever seen. This water is pink, not a subtle hint of rose or a trick of the light reflecting off red sand. This is bubblegum pink, cotton candy pink, the kind of shocking colour that makes your brain struggle to process what your eyes are telling you. This is Lake Hillier, a 600-metre wide body of water that looks like someone dumped thousands of gallons of strawberry milk into a forest clearing. From above, it sits like a giant pink jewel surrounded by emerald trees, with a narrow strip of white salt creating a perfect border between the impossible water and the ordinary world around it. The contrast is so surreal that your first instinct is to assume it's been digitally altered, some social media trick gone viral, but Lake Hillier is absolutely undeniably real. On January 15th, 1802, British navigator Matthew Flinders was exploring the Recherche Archipelago when he decided to climb the highest peak on Middle Island. Flinders was methodical in his mapping of Australia's coastline, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw from that rocky summit. In his journal, he recorded the discovery of a small lake of a rose colour. His understated description barely captures what must have been a moment of pure bewilderment. Here was a man who had sailed around the world, charted unknown coastlines, and encountered countless natural wonders, yet he was looking at something that challenged his understanding of how lakes should behave. Flinders and his crew descended to the lake's shore, where they collected samples of the bizarre pink water. They found it was as salty as the ocean, with a consistency slightly thicker than normal lake water, but beyond those basic observations they had no way to explain the phenomenon. The lake was named after William Hillier, a crew member who died of dysentery during their stay on Middle Island, ensuring that this natural wonder would carry the memory of their expedition forever. For the next 150 years, Lake Hillier remained one of those tantalizing mysteries that science couldn't quite crack. Occasional visitors reported that the pink colour remained constant regardless of season, weather, or time of day. Unlike other coloured lakes around the world that might change hue with temperature or algae blooms, Hillier's shocking pink appeared to be permanent. The water was safe to swim in, though few people were brave enough to dive into something that looked more like a cosmetic product than a natural body of water. In the 1950s, scientists finally mounted the first serious investigation into Lake Hillier's colour. Their working theory focused on Dunaliella salina, a type of algae known to produce pink pigments in extremely salty environments. This microscopic organism creates carotenoids, the same compounds that make carrots orange and flamingos pink, as protection against intense sunlight and high salt concentrations. Researchers were confident they'd found their answer. Pink algae equals pink water. Mystery solved. But when they examined water samples under microscopes, they found something puzzling. While Dunaliella salina was present in Lake Hillier, it wasn't abundant enough to account for the lake's intense coloration. There had to be something else at work, some additional factor that was turning this isolated lake into nature's pink highlighter. The breakthrough came with advances in genetic sequencing technology in the early 2000s. Scientists could now identify not just what was visible under a microscope, but every microscopic life form present in a sample. When researchers from Flinders University conducted comprehensive DNA analysis of Lake Hillier's water, they discovered a complex ecosystem of extremophile organisms, life forms that thrive in conditions that would kill most other living things. And the lake's pink colour, they learned, comes from a perfect storm of biological activity. Dunaliella salina algae does play a role, producing red carotenoids when stressed by the lake's extreme saltiness. But the real contributors are a community of halophilic bacteria, salt-loving microorganisms that paint the water with their own pigments. Salinibacter ruber creates bright red compounds, while various species of archaea, ancient single-celled organisms that represent some of the earliest life on Earth, add their own colourful contributions to the mix. The lake's extraordinary salinity, measuring around 340 grams per litre, 10 times saltier than the ocean, creates an environment where only the most specialised organisms can survive. These extremophiles don't just tolerate the crushing salt concentration, they require it to function. When they are under stress from the intense salinity and ultraviolet radiation, they ramp up production of protective pigments that happen to be brilliantly coloured. It's as if the lake is constantly blushing from the extreme conditions it contains. But even this biological explanation doesn't account for everything scientists observe about Lake Hillier. The colour remains remarkably stable throughout the year, showing none of the seasonal variation that characterises other pink lakes around the world. Most pink lakes fade to normal blue or green when conditions change, when salt concentrations drop during rainy seasons, or when temperatures shift and affect the microorganism populations. Lake Hillier maintains its shocking pink consistency with an almost supernatural reliability. The lake's isolation adds another layer to its mystery. Middle Island sits 130 kilometres from the nearest mainland, surrounded by deep ocean that should prevent the mixing of different water sources. Yet Lake Hillier is connected to the ocean through underground channels, creating a delicate balance between salt water seeping in from below and rainfall diluting the surface. How this system maintains such consistent conditions year after year remains poorly understood. Recent genetic studies have revealed that Lake Hillier hosts species of bacteria and archaea that exist nowhere else on Earth. The extreme conditions have created an isolated evolutionary laboratory where life forms have adapted in unique ways. Some of these organisms show genetic modifications that scientists are still working to understand. They've developed novel proteins for handling extreme salt stress, unusual methods of energy production, and pigment systems that are unlike anything found in more normal environments. Perhaps most intriguingly, the lake appears to be getting pinker over time. Satellite images spanning several decades suggest that the colour intensity has actually increased, though scientists aren't sure why. Climate change might be concentrating the salt levels as evaporation increases, or the extremophile populations might be growing more robust as conditions become more extreme. The lake seems to be responding to environmental changes in ways that researchers are only beginning to document. What makes Lake Hillier's mystery even more compelling is that it's not unique. Australia has several other pink lakes, but most of them are temporary phenomena that fade when conditions change. Lake Hillier's permanent vivid coloration sets it apart even among other pink lakes. Scientists still can't fully explain why this particular lake maintains such intense, stable colour, while others fluctuate with the seasons. The lake continues to challenge our understanding of extreme ecosystems and the limits of life on Earth. Each new study reveals additional layers of biological complexity, new species of extremophiles, and novel biochemical processes that science is still working to catalogue. The simple question of why Lake Hillier is pink has opened windows into evolutionary biology, extremophile research, and the way life adapts to seemingly impossible conditions, Rishat Structure, Mauritania. When astronauts look down at Earth from the International Space Station, certain features leap out from the curved horizon like beacons calling for attention. The Amazon River snakes through green wilderness, the Great Wall of China traces ancient borders, and somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Sahara Desert, a perfect circular formation stares back at them like a giant eye. This is the Rishat Structure, a 40-kilometre-wide bullseye pattern etched into the Mauritanian desert, with such precision that it seems artificial, as if some cosmic architect drew concentric circles in the sand with a massive compass. Standing at the centre of this geological wonder today, you might feel disappointed at first. The drama visible from space dissolves into ordinary desert terrain, rocky outcrops, scattered stones, and endless stretches of sand punctuated by thorny acacia trees. But walk the concentric rings that make up this formation, and you begin to understand that you're standing inside one of Earth's most perfectly preserved geological textbooks. Each ring tells a story written in stone, each ridge represents millions of years of planetary history, and the perfect circular symmetry speaks of forces so precisely balanced that their outcome seems almost supernatural. The Eye of the Sahara measures exactly 40 kilometers from edge to edge, with 3 distinct concentric rings that rise above the surrounding desert floor. The outermost ring consists of resistant quartzite that forms sharp ridges up to 200 meters high. Moving inward, the middle ring is built of limestone and dolomite that has weathered into gentler slopes. The innermost circle, the heart of the structure, contains volcanic rocks and mineral deposits, unlike anything found elsewhere in this part of Africa. From ground level, these rings appear as natural hills and valleys. From space, they form one of the most geometrically perfect formations on the planet's surface. To understand how this remarkable structure came to exist, we need to journey back 100 million years to the Cretaceous period, when this part of Africa was undergoing dramatic geological upheaval. Deep beneath the surface, a massive chamber of molten rock was pushing upward through the Earth's crust. This wasn't an explosive volcanic eruption, but a slower, more persistent force. A giant bubble of magma seeking the surface like air rising through water. As this molten rock dome pushed upward, it lifted the overlying layers of sedimentary rock that had been deposited over hundreds of millions of years. Imagine lifting a stack of different coloured blankets from underneath water. The entire stack would rise together, maintaining its layered structure while forming a dome shape. This is exactly what happened to the ancient rock layers above the Rishat intrusion. Limestone, sandstone, and shale beds that had formed over vast periods of time were gently warped upward into a perfect dome. But the molten rock never quite reached the surface. About 94 million years ago, the upward pressure suddenly stopped. The magma chamber cooled and hardened into igneous rock deep underground, leaving behind a dome of uplifted sedimentary layers like a frozen bubble in the Earth's crust. For millions of years, this dome sat beneath ancient seas, covered by newer sediments, its circular structure hidden from any eyes that might have appreciated its perfect geometry. The next chapter of the Richat story unfolded over the following 90 million years as erosion began its patient work. As the climate changed and sea levels dropped, the dome was exposed to wind and water. But erosion didn't wear away the structure uniformly. Instead, it carved along lines of weakness in the rock, following the natural joints and fractures that had formed as the dome cooled and contracted. The harder, more resistant rock layers formed ridges, while softer sedimentary beds weathered into valleys. Since the original dome was perfectly circular, the erosion patterns followed the same geometry, creating concentric rings of hills and valleys. Each ring represents a different type of rock from a different period in Earth's history. The outermost ring consists of 600-million-year-old quartzite, incredibly hard rock that has resisted erosion for eons. The middle ring contains 500-million-year-old limestone and dolomite, somewhat softer but still forming substantial ridges. The innermost ring exposes the youngest rocks, volcanic material from the original intrusion that created the dome. For countless millennia, this perfect circular formation sat in the middle of the growing Sahara Desert, witnessed only by migrating animals and the occasional nomadic peoples who crossed these remote badlands. The Richat structure lies in one of the most isolated regions of Mauritania, far from major trade routes or permanent settlements. Indigenous Berber and Arab nomads who encountered it gave it the name Guelber Richat, meaning the Eye of the Desert in the local Hassaniya Arabic dialect. These desert peoples developed their own explanations for the strange circular formation. Some saw it as the eye of a sleeping giant buried beneath the sand, others as a divine symbol etched into the earth by supernatural forces. Nomads used the distinctive rings as navigation landmarks during long desert crossings, and the structure became incorporated into oral traditions passed down through generations of desert travelers. French colonial administrators in the early 20th century made the first Western scientific observations of the Richat structure, but their ground-level surveys couldn't capture the perfect circular nature of the formation. It wasn't until the 1960s, when satellite photography first became available, that scientists realized what they were looking at. Early satellite images revealed the structure's perfect geometry with startling clarity, leading to immediate speculation that it might be an ancient impact crater. The impact crater theory made sense initially. The Richat structure's size and circular shape resembled other known meteorite impact sites, and its isolated location in the Sahara seemed consistent with a cosmic collision. For nearly 2 decades, researchers assumed they were studying the remnant of an ancient asteroid impact, one of the largest and best-preserved craters on Earth. But as geological surveys became more sophisticated in the 1980s and 1990s, evidence began pointing in a different direction. Impact craters typically contain shocked minerals, rock crystals that have been subjected to the extreme pressures of meteorite collision. No such minerals were found at Richat. Impact sites also usually have a raised rim of debris thrown outward from the collision point, but Richat's rings slope inward toward the centre. Most tellingly, the rock layers at Richat show clear evidence of being pushed upward from below, not compressed downward from above. The breakthrough came with advanced radiometric dating of rock samples from the structure's centre. Volcanic rocks from the core of the formation were dated to 94 million years ago, providing a precise timestamp for when the original magma intrusion occurred. Additional studies revealed that the igneous rocks contained alkaline minerals typical of deep crustal magma chambers, not the mixed compositions expected from meteorite impacts. Modern research has revealed that the Richat structure represents something even rarer than an impact crater, a perfect example of what geologists call a failed intrusion. The magma that created the dome came tantalizingly close to breaking through to the surface and forming a volcano, but stopped just short of eruption. Had it succeeded, we might have a volcanic mountain in the Sahara instead of concentric rings. Today, the Richat structure faces new challenges as climate change and human activity threaten its preservation. Rising temperatures are accelerating erosion rates, potentially altering the delicate balance between hard and soft rock layers that creates the ring structure. Increased mineral exploration in Mauritania has brought mining interests to the region, attracted by the unusual mineral deposits found in the structure's centre. The formation's remote location, once its greatest protection, now complicates conservation efforts. With no permanent settlements nearby and limited infrastructure, It's difficult to monitor changes or prevent unauthorized activities. Satellite monitoring provides some oversight, but the scale of the structure makes comprehensive protection challenging. International scientific interest in Richat continues to grow as researchers realize its value as a natural laboratory for studying geological processes. The perfect preservation of rock layers spanning hundreds of millions of years makes it an ideal location for understanding how continents form and evolve. New technologies like ground-penetrating radar and 3D geological modeling are revealing details about the subsurface structure that weren't visible to earlier generations of researchers. Climate scientists are also studying the Richat structure to understand how desert environments change over geological time. The rock layers preserve evidence of ancient climates, from tropical seas to ice ages, providing clues about how the Sahara region has changed over millions of years. This information becomes increasingly valuable as researchers work to predict how current climate change might alter desert environments. The Eye of the Sahara continues to watch over the desert from its position at the crossroads of geological time, a perfect circle that connects Earth's deep past with its uncertain future, waiting for the next chapter in its slow transformation under the patient forces that have shaped it for 100 million years. Kawah Ijen, Indonesia. 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're climbing through absolute darkness up the slopes of an active volcano. Your headlamp cuts a thin beam through air so thick with sulfur that every breath burns your throat like swallowing broken glass. The acrid smell isn't just unpleasant, it's a warning. This is the scent of hydrogen sulfide gas, deadly in high concentrations, seeping from volcanic vents below. Yet you keep climbing, driven by the promise of witnessing something that shouldn't exist in the natural world. Flames that burn electric blue in the darkness. This is your approach to Kawah Ijen, a volcanic crater in eastern Java where the laws of fire seem to have been rewritten. The 2-hour trek through the pre-dawn darkness is just preparation for what awaits at the summit. Your lungs work harder with each step, not just from the altitude, but from the increasing concentration of volcanic gases. The sulfur smell grows stronger until it becomes a physical presence, coating your mouth with a metallic taste that no amount of water can wash away. When you finally reach the crater rim and look down into the abyss, your brain struggles to process what you're seeing. Far below, rivers of electric blue fire flow across the crater floor like molten lightning frozen in motion. These aren't the orange-red flames you know from campfires or candles. This fire burns with the impossible blue of a gasto flame, but magnified beyond anything you've ever imagined. The blue streams wind between sulfur-yellow deposits like neon rivers cutting through an alien landscape. The sight hits you with immediate physical force. Your heart rate spikes not from the climb but from the pure visual shock of witnessing something your evolutionary experience never prepared you for. The blue flames seem to violate fundamental rules about how the world should look. Fire should be red, orange, yellow, the warm colours of safety and comfort. This cold blue fire suggests something otherworldly, something that belongs in the realm of science fiction rather than nature. But it's not just what you see that overwhelms your senses. The sound layer of Kawah Ijen creates its own assault on your perception. The crater isn't silent, it hisses, bubbles and roars with the constant voice of escaping gases. Steam vents called fumaroles create a symphony of high-pitched screaming as superheated vapor escapes from the Earth's depths. The sound is relentless, a reminder that you're standing on the edge of one of the most geologically active places on Earth. The turquoise lake at the crater's center adds another impossible color to the scene. This isn't the clean blue of mountain lakes or the dark depths of normal volcanic craters. This is the artificial turquoise of swimming pool chemicals, a colour so vivid and unnatural that it looks painted onto the landscape. The lake's surface appears calm from the rim, but approach too closely and you'll discover it's actually a churning cauldron of sulfuric acid with a pH level close to 0, more acidic than battery acid. Your gas mask becomes essential as you descend into the crater, but even through the protective equipment, the sulfur finds ways to assault your senses. The smell penetrates everything, clinging to your clothes, your hair, your equipment. Hours after leaving the crater, you'll still taste sulfur with every breath, as if the volcano has marked you with its chemical signature. The blue flames themselves create an almost hypnotic effect on visitors. People report standing transfixed for hours, unable to look away from the impossible fire. there's something deeply disturbing about flames that burn without warmth. These blue fires are cold to the touch, unlike any fire in normal human experience. The cognitive dissonance between what fire should be and what you're witnessing creates a profound psychological impact that many describe as life-changing. The science behind this sensory assault is as remarkable as the experience itself. The blue flames aren't actually lava, though they are often mistakenly called blue lava. They're jets of sulfur gas erupting from the Earth at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. When these superheated gases meet oxygen in the air, they ignite spontaneously, burning with the characteristic blue colour of pure sulfur combustion. During daylight hours, these flames are nearly invisible, but in darkness they create rivers of electric blue light that seem to flow across the crater floor. The turquoise lake that dominates the crater contains some of the most concentrated sulfuric acid found anywhere in nature. This acid lake maintains a constant temperature of around 60 degrees Celsius, heated by volcanic activity below. The unusual colour comes from dissolved sulfur compounds and the extreme acidity that prevents most minerals from forming the colours typically seen in natural bodies of water. What makes the Kawah Ijen experience so overwhelming is the combination of sensory inputs that human beings aren't evolutionarily equipped to process. The blue flames trigger deep-seated unease because fire that burns cold violates our fundamental understanding of safety and danger. Our ancestors learned to associate red and orange flames with warmth, cooking and protection from predators. Blue fire suggests something alien and potentially threatening. The sulfur smell activates primitive warning systems in our brains. Hydrogen sulfide is detected at incredibly low concentrations, parts per billion, because our survival once depended on recognizing dangerous gases. Even when wearing protective equipment, visitors report feeling anxious and hyper-alert, their nervous systems responding to chemical signals that scream danger. Yet people are drawn to Kawah Ijen in increasing numbers, seeking exactly this sensory overload that their bodies are telling them to avoid. This paradox reflects a fundamental human drive to experience the extraordinary, even when it pushes us beyond our comfort zones. The crater offers something increasingly rare in our mediated world, a direct encounter with natural forces so powerful and alien that they reshape our understanding of what's possible. The psychological impact extends beyond the immediate sensory experience. Many visitors report that witnessing the blue flames changes their relationship with the natural world. The realization that such impossible beauty can exist in nature, hidden in remote corners of the world, creates what psychologists call awe response, a feeling of being small in the face of something vast and incomprehensible. This awe response has measurable effects on human psychology and physiology. Studies show that experiences of natural awe reduce stress hormones, increase feelings of connection to something larger than oneself, and can create lasting changes in perspective and behaviour. Kawah Ijen provides one of the most intense awe experiences available in the natural world, combining visual impossibility with physical challenge and genuine danger. The crater's remoteness amplifies these psychological effects. Reaching Kawah Ijen requires commitment. The midnight hike, the physical discomfort, the potential health risks from toxic gases. This investment of effort and risk makes the payoff more meaningful. Unlike tourist attractions that can be viewed from comfortable distances, experiencing the blue flames requires visitors to enter the volcano's dangerous environment, creating a sense of earned reward. The human drive to seek such extreme sensory experiences reflects deeper needs that modern life often fails to satisfy. In our increasingly safe and predictable world, places like Kawah Ijen offer genuine encounters with the sublime, experiences so overwhelming that they temporarily dissolve the boundaries of normal consciousness. Thor's Well, Oregon, stand on the rocky shore of Cape Perpetua on the Oregon coast, and you'll witness something that appears to break the fundamental rules of physics. Here, in the middle of solid basalt rock, a perfectly circular hole seems to swallow the Pacific Ocean one wave at a time. Water rushes toward this mysterious opening with unstoppable force, disappears into what looks like a bottomless pit, then erupts back out in towering geysers that shoot 20 feet into the air. This is Thor's Well, a phenomenon so visually striking that it's earned the nickname the drain pipe of the Pacific, as if someone pulled the plug on the entire ocean and forgot to put it back. The illusion is so convincing that your brain struggles to accept what you're seeing. Ocean water flows inexorably toward a hole that appears to have no bottom, creating whirlpools and spirals as it disappears into the rock. During high tide, the effect becomes hypnotic, an endless cycle of water vanishing into the earth, only to explode back up moments later in dramatic vertical fountains. The timing seems random, unpredictable, as if the ocean is breathing through this stone portal. This type of coastal phenomenon exists in scattered locations around the world, each one drawing visitors who are fascinated by the spectacle of ocean water defying gravity. In Australia, the Kiama blowhole south of Sydney creates similar drama as waves force seawater through underground channels, shooting it up to 80 feet in the air. The spouting horn on Hawaii's Kawah Island produces its own version of oceanic theatre, with water jetting skyward accompanied by a distinctive hissing sound that local legends attribute to a trapped lizard spirit. Scotland's coast offers the blowhole near Carnoustie, where North Sea waves compress air and water in sea caves, creating explosive eruptions that can be heard from miles away. Iceland presents the Geyserstrokke. Though technically a geothermal hot spring rather than a marine blowhole, it demonstrates how underground water pressure can create spectacular vertical displays. Portugal's Boca do Inferno, the mouth of hell, near Cascais, shows how Atlantic waves carve dramatic openings in limestone cliffs. Yet Thor's Well stands apart from all these coastal wonders in several crucial ways. Most blowholes create impressive vertical fountains, but the water source is obvious. You can see waves entering sea caves or tunnels. Thor's Well presents the opposite illusion. Instead of water shooting up from a known source, it appears to drain downward into nothingness, creating an effect that seems to violate the basic principle that water flows to the lowest point and stays there. The visual trickery becomes even more compelling when you consider the timing. Traditional blowholes operate on predictable cycles. Waves enter, pressure builds, water erupts. Thor's Well operates on a more complex rhythm that combines incoming waves with tidal changes, creating moments when it simultaneously drains and erupts, as if the ocean can't decide whether it wants to flow in or out of this mysterious opening. The scientific explanation for Thor's Well reveals why it creates such a unique visual experience compared to other coastal phenomena. Unlike most blowholes, which are formed by waves carving horizontal tunnels into cliff sides, Thor's Well began as a sea cave with a roof that eventually collapsed. This collapsed cave created a bowl-shaped depression in the basalt shoreline, approximately 20 feet deep, with an opening at the bottom that connects to the ocean through submerged passages. The basalt rock that forms the Oregon coastline is the key to understanding what makes Thor's Well special. This volcanic rock formed 15 million years ago, when massive lava flows poured from fissures in northeastern Oregon, travelling hundreds of miles to reach the coast. As the lava cooled, it created the dense, hard basalt that characterises this stretch of shoreline. Unlike the limestone or sandstone that forms most coastal blowholes around the world, basalt is extremely resistant to erosion, which allows for more complex underground channel systems to develop and persist over geological time. The wave action that carved Thor's Well worked differently than typical blowhole formation. Instead of following natural fractures in sedimentary rock, the waves exploited cooling joints in the basalt, vertical cracks that formed as the original lava flow contracted. Over thousands of years, wave action gradually widened these joints into a network of underwater channels that connect the depression to the open ocean. What creates the dramatic visual effect is the specific geometry of these underwater connections. During incoming tides, water flows up through the bottom opening, filling the depression from below while surface waves simultaneously pour in from above. This creates the illusion that water is draining down while actually being fed from underneath. During outgoing tides, the process reverses, with water draining both through the bottom opening and over the rim, creating complex flow patterns that change moment by moment. The depth and shape of Thor's Well's depression contributes to its unique behaviour compared to shallower blowholes. At 20 feet deep, it can hold a significant volume of water, creating a reservoir that interacts with both surface waves and subsurface flows. This depth allows for more complex hydraulic effects, including the formation of standing waves within the depression and the creation of powerful updrafts when water is forced upward through the narrow bottom opening. The Oregon coast's extreme tidal range, up to 12 feet between high and low tide, amplifies Thor's Well's effects beyond what's seen at most other coastal blowholes. This dramatic tidal variation means the underground water pressure changes significantly throughout each tidal cycle, creating different behaviours at different times of day. During the highest tides, the subsurface pressure becomes so intense that water erupts from the well even when surface waves aren't directly feeding into it. The broader implications of studying Thor's well extend beyond understanding one unusual coastal formation. It represents a perfect example of how specific geological conditions can create phenomena that appear to violate natural laws but actually demonstrate complex interactions between multiple physical forces. The formation challenges our assumptions about how water behaves in coastal environments and shows how erosion patterns in volcanic rock can differ dramatically from those in sedimentary formations. The study of Thor's well and similar formations also provides insights into coastal erosion processes that become increasingly important as sea levels rise and storm patterns intensify due to climate change. Understanding how different rock types respond to wave action helps scientists predict how coastlines will change over time and identify areas most vulnerable to erosion. The formation serves as a natural laboratory for studying wave hydraulics and the complex interactions between surface waves, tidal flows, and underground water movement. Engineers studying coastal protection and harbour design can learn from the way Thor's well channels and redirects wave energy, potentially applying these principles to human-made coastal structures. Thor's well demonstrates that even in our age of satellite imaging and detailed geological mapping, the natural world can still produce phenomena that stop us in our tracks and make us question our basic understanding of how the physical world operates. Cenote Angelita, Mexico. Stand on the rocky shore of Cape Perpetua on the Oregon coast, and you'll witness something that appears to break the fundamental rules of physics. Here, in the middle of solid basalt rock, a perfectly circular hole seems to swallow the Pacific Ocean one wave at a time. Water rushes toward this mysterious opening with unstoppable force, disappears into what looks like a bottomless pit, then erupts back out in towering geysers that shoot 20 feet into the air. This is Thor's well, a phenomenon so visually striking that it's earned the nickname the drain pipe of the Pacific, as if someone pulled the plug on the entire ocean and forgot to put it back. The illusion is so convincing that your brain struggles to accept what you're seeing. Ocean water flows inexorably toward a hole that appears to have no bottom, creating whirlpools and spirals as it disappears into the rock. During high tide, the effect becomes hypnotic, an endless cycle of water vanishing into the earth, only to explode back up moments later in dramatic vertical fountains. The timing seems random, unpredictable, as if the ocean is breathing through this stone portal. This type of coastal phenomenon exists in scattered locations around the world, each one drawing visitors who are fascinated by the spectacle of ocean water defying gravity. In Australia, the Kiama blowhole south of Sydney creates similar drama as waves force seawater through underground channels, shooting it up to 80 feet in the air. The spouting horn on Hawaii's Kawah Island produces its own version of oceanic theatre, with water jetting skyward accompanied by a distinctive hissing sound that local legends attribute to a trapped lizard spirit. Scotland's coast offers the blowhole near Carnoustie, where North Sea waves compress air and water in sea caves, creating explosive eruptions that can be heard from miles away. Iceland presents the geyser Strokka. Though technically a geothermal hot spring rather than a marine blowhole, it demonstrates how underground water pressure can create spectacular vertical displays. Portugal's Boca do Inferno, the mouth of hell near Cascais, shows how Atlantic waves carve dramatic openings in limestone cliffs. Yet Thor's well stands apart from all these coastal wonders in several crucial ways. Most blowholes create impressive vertical fountains, but the water source is obvious. You can see waves entering sea caves or tunnels. Thor's well presents the opposite illusion. Instead of water shooting up from a known source, it appears to drain downward into nothingness, creating an effect that seems to violate the basic principle that water flows to the lowest point and stays there. The visual trickery becomes even more compelling when you consider the timing. Traditional blowholes operate on predictable cycles. Waves enter, pressure builds, water erupts. Thor's well operates on a more complex rhythm that combines incoming waves with tidal changes, creating moments when it simultaneously drains and erupts, as if the ocean can't decide whether it wants to flow in or out of this mysterious opening. The scientific explanation for Thor's well reveals why it creates such a unique visual experience compared to other coastal phenomena. Unlike most blowholes, which are formed by waves carving horizontal tunnels into cliff sides, Thor's Well began as a sea cave with a roof that eventually collapsed. This collapsed cave created a bowl-shaped depression in the basalt shoreline, approximately 20 feet deep, with an opening at the bottom that connects to the ocean through submerged passages. The basalt rock that forms the Oregon coastline is the key to understanding what makes Thor's Well special. This volcanic rock formed 15 million years ago, when massive lava flows poured from fissures in northeastern Oregon, travelling hundreds of miles to reach the coast. As the lava cooled, it created the dense, hard basalt that characterises this stretch of shoreline. Unlike the limestone or sandstone that forms most coastal blowholes around the world, basalt is extremely resistant to erosion, which allows for more complex underground channel systems to develop and persist over geological time. The wave action that carved Thor's Well worked differently than typical blowhole formation. Instead of following natural fractures in sedimentary rock, the waves exploited cooling joints in the basalt, vertical cracks that formed as the original lava flow contracted. Over thousands of years, wave action gradually widened these joints into a network of underwater channels that connect the depression to the open ocean. What creates the dramatic visual effect is the specific geometry of these underwater connections. During incoming tides, water flows up through the bottom opening, filling the depression from below while surface waves simultaneously pour in from above. This creates the illusion that water is draining down while actually being fed from underneath. During outgoing tides, the process reverses, with water draining both through the bottom opening and over the rim, creating complex flow patterns that change moment by moment. The depth and shape of Thor's Well's depression contributes to its unique behaviour compared to shallower blowholes. At 20 feet deep, it can hold a significant volume of water, creating a reservoir that interacts with both surface waves and subsurface flows. This depth allows for more complex hydraulic effects, including the formation of standing waves within the depression and the creation of powerful updrafts when water is forced upward through the narrow bottom opening. The Oregon coast's extreme tidal range, up to 12 feet between high and low tide, amplifies Thor's Well's effects beyond what's seen at most other coastal blowholes. This dramatic tidal variation means the underground water pressure changes significantly throughout each tidal cycle, creating different behaviours at different times of day. During the highest tides, the subsurface pressure becomes so intense that water erupts from the well even when surface waves aren't directly feeding into it. The broader implications of studying Thor's Well extend beyond understanding one unusual coastal formation. It represents a perfect example of how specific geological conditions can create phenomena that appear to violate natural laws but actually demonstrate complex interactions between multiple physical forces. The formation challenges our assumptions about how water behaves in coastal environments and shows how erosion patterns in volcanic rock can differ dramatically from those in sedimentary formations. The study of Thor's Well and similar formations also provides insights into coastal erosion processes that become increasingly important as sea levels rise and storm patterns intensify due to climate change. Understanding how different rock types respond to wave action helps scientists predict how coastlines will change over time and identify areas most vulnerable to erosion. The formation serves as a natural laboratory for studying wave hydraulics and the complex interactions between surface waves, tidal flows, and underground water movement. Engineers studying coastal protection and harbour design can learn from the way Thor's Well channels and redirects wave energy, potentially applying these principles to human-made coastal structures. Thor's Well demonstrates that even in our age of satellite imaging and detailed geological mapping, the natural world can still produce phenomena that stop us in our tracks and make us question our basic understanding of how the physical world operates.